everyone. It's a very special episode of the Hall of Fame show, and I'm Kirk Buchner, the owner, the operator of Notinhalloffame.com, and of course, the sister sites, the fictitious Athlete Hall of Fame, the fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. Big news will come soon on that one, come late January or early February, or whenever Evan and I get to it. My partner, Evan Nolan, how you doing, brother?
Doing pretty well. I'll be doing better when this overtime is over. I just do not want the Celtics to be the team that loses to the Pistons to break their streak. Can't believe we went to overtime. We're down 19 at one point. So,
well,
yikes.
Well, there we go. You'll have to keep us posted as we go. But before we sort of introduce everyone else on this panel, I just want to welcome our new sponsor, our new partnership. We are now paired up with a company called Millions.co. And if you are a sports fan, and if you're watching this or listening to this, I got to assume that you are. This is a place that you've got to check out. There's a lot of athletes who are there, and you can connect with them. Maybe you've got a project in mind. Maybe you want to just get a shout out. They are growing every day. Hey, they just added me. Hey, look at that.
There you go.
This doesn't mean they'll just add anybody. I want to point that out in case you're sort of wondering that. But
it means they're international. They're worldwide. They went north of the border.
Well, I am now becoming internationally known, but I am known to rock a microphone.
Wow.
No?
It takes 6 to make this podcast go right. So what's the
All right. Well, I didn't say that I was necessarily the greatest, the best at segues. I'm really awful at that. But joining me is Chris Mouradian. How you doing?
I'm good, Kirk. How you doing tonight?
Doing great, doing great. Chicago's best sports writer, Jack Silverstein.
Hi, Kirk. Hi, everybody.
The Schlegel daddy himself.
Wow, why can't I be the best at something?
Chicago's surliest Bears fan.
There you go.
Ooh, oh, you know what? Not a part of a cult. I'll take that. Thank you.
There you go. And Pierce Conboy, Conboy, sorry. What are you the best at?
That mustache game is on point.
I don't know.
You're rocking the name of Fu Manchu there, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
That's exquisite.
There you go. Gotta love it.
You need to get him a fur coat.
No, I'm not going to go with that joke. The reason I brought this crew together is we are reacting to the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the announcement that they made of the 15 finalists. I know that speaking for myself, I'm happy about some of them, and I'm scratching my head at a couple others. I think that based on the conversations that we have in our little chat group, I kind of know where a lot of this is going to go, but I can't wait to sort of see where this does take us. So we're going to go alphabetically. And we're going to start with something that I think has made a lot of people happy. I know I'm in that category. Eric Allen is a finalist finally.
This is what, year 18 for Eric Allen? Keep me honest there, gentlemen.
That is correct.
So he has a shot in the next 3 years.
He has a shot. Looking at voting trends in the semifinalist era, the latest anyone has reached the finals for the first time and gotten in as a modern is Sam Mills in year 18. So Eric Allen, year 18, first time as a finals, that would go along with that. It doesn't mean he's going to get in because you're in that dicey late zone like we saw with Joe Jacoby, but there is a little bit of a precedent there. It's certainly better than getting in for the first time into the room at 19 or 20.
Yeah, and I think Albert Lewis. I'm sorry, I was going to say. I think that's Jack. You just segued. There you go, Kirk. That's the segue into the difference between Eric Allen and Albert Lewis. Albert Lewis doesn't get into the formal discussion until year 20. Almost makes it, but doesn't. Now gets to the senior pool. At least with Eric Allen, we know most likely he's in the room at 18. Even if he is the first cut this time, there's 2 more potential opportunities. It's very unlikely we'd see him drop back. Like, it's good to see he's got positional uniqueness because he's the only corner out of the 15, so that could help him carve his own lane. Sorry, Chris, I think I jumped on you, but go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no, I was basically going to say the same thing, that he gets him in the room a couple years earlier than Albert Lewis, and he gets the conversation started.
I want to read a tweet from one Pierce Conboy that I really appreciated. This was in response to our colleague Clark Judge posting his podcast with Ira Kaufman and Rick Gosselin, their reaction show. Pierce wrote, quote, It might be worth noting that of players starting after World War II, the Pro Football Hall of Fame has essentially inducted 3 wide receivers for every 2 corners. And here we are again, bending over backwards, trying to accommodate as many wide receivers that will only further the disparity between the 2 yin-yang positions as possible. And I thought that really summed it up, because if Eric Allen was a wide receiver with his credentials, he wouldn't have taken to year 18 to get in. When you look at the counting stats, the peak seasons, the UPI Defensive Player of the Year, the big defenses that he played on, people wouldn't be complaining about, oh, he retired a year early. It would just be like, played on those great Eagles teams, played on some great Raiders teams, 54 interceptions, did it young, did it old, done. What is the deal? What is the deal with corners?
Always has
with the, I think it's just the fact they don't play the offensive side of the ball is 1. 2, when you bring up that 54 interception number, the way I might equate it in my mind is I think about it as like a more modern receiver that maybe has somewhere between 12 to 13,000 receiving yards. So it puts them high up on the all-time list, but that doesn't always translate in terms of like they put up a bunch of yards, but it doesn't really matter. But I think it's easier for voters to understand the wide receiver number versus the defender number, like 12 or 13,000 compared to 54 versus 44. And I know that might not sound like much. It might sound like I'm crazy because I am, but there's something to it. You've got 3 wide receivers in the top 15 again. You got another 3 that are sitting there in that mix between 16 to 25. We've got 1 corner advance, and how many other corners were in the semifinals that didn't advance?
Give me a second. I'll get that for you in a second.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, Jeff, about the difference in just the visual of the numbers, because I was thinking even the career sacks list, which they seem to be just kind of moving down, those are in the hundreds. Yep. And if you look at the career interceptions list and you look at how many guys aren't in or took a long time, Paul Krause is at the top, he's in. Tunnel, Rod Woodson, Night Train. Now, Ken Riley finally did get in. Obviously, it took him a long time. Charles Woodson, Ed Reed, Ronnie Lott. Those guys I'm naming all have other things beyond just a number. Darren Sharper, I think, would be in, but for et cetera. All right, now you got Dave Brown, 62, Dick LeBeau. He got in, but he got in. Was he a senior or was he a coach?
He was a senior.
He was a senior.
But they
he got in for his play, but the fact that the defensive coordinator didn't hurt.
I think Jack.
All right. Emmett Thomas, Mel Blount, and now here's where we get to some problems. Bobby Boyd, Eugene Robinson, who already didn't have a lot of Pro Bowls even before the 98 Super Bowl. Johnny Robinson is in, but he took a while. Everson Walls, not in, 57. Lem Barney in, Pat Fisher, not in, Aeneas Williams. So that's your top 20, and it's pretty well split. Whereas with that sack list, they pretty much run down it. And now we're going to get there. I know Kirk, you said we're going alphabetically, so we're not going to get to him for a while, but whatever. I'm of the opinion, and I feel like it's widely shared, that the best thing Fred Taylor has going for him is that he just so happens to be the next man up on the rushing list, removing Adrian Peterson and Frank Gore, because there's nothing else that distinguishes him. There's not, of all these running backs.
We don't have to go alphabetically.
Well, I want to.
Okay, well, so my point is, and to what Jeff was saying, with all these running backs between Fred Taylor and Sean Alexander, there's nothing else that distinguishes. All these other guys have this mix of rings, rushing titles, MVPs, OPOYs, more top 5, higher scrimmage, etc. And what does Fred Taylor have? He just has the rush. So then when you flip that back to like Eric Allen, if Eric Allen was a running back, he would have been a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think, Jack, if I may, to like follow up or double down on that. If you think about wide receivers and running backs, we think about like 1,000-yard season as a milestone that everybody understands, everybody can get, right? I think about sacks. We often think about double-digit sack seasons. It kind of becomes its own milestone. What the hell is the milestone for coverage? The hell is the milestone for interceptions in a season? There really isn't one, right? So I think it is telling about how corners get viewed. Like Albert Lewis had no business waiting till year 20 just to then get bumped in the senior pool. I think we all agree with that. Mm-hmm. We look at some other corners and say, why did it take them so long? Even like Rondé Barber. Like if you talk about the sacks and the turnovers, the defensive touchdowns, to your point, Jack, when you talk about if he played wide receiver, he probably would have been in 3 or 5 years before he was as a corner. If you take similar resume and apply it to the offensive side of the ball.
Hey, Jeff, to answer your question from before, none of the other 10 who were eliminated were cornerbacks. So he's the
Yeah, I
only
didn't think so.
corner even on that list. And honestly, last year's class getting rid of Revis and Rondé helps him a lot because he's the only one they have to look at. We have a couple
And Albert Lewis, in a way. I mean,
And
they
Albert
got, you
Lewis
know,
is
that
right.
like they got rid of. And by the way, I want to correct myself. Eric Allen, 54 career interceptions. I think I said 57.
regardless. But I mean, we have a couple of safeties here, which we'll get to eventually. But this class is just about as good as Albert Lewis could hope for coming on. Not Albert Lewis, Eric Allen could hope for coming on for the first time.
Okay,
He gets to be unique.
Walking his way.
Who are the corners? Who are the corners coming? Are there any big corners coming next
Richard
year or
Sherman.
the year after? I feel like is Sherman later? I remember that Richard Sherman came up when we did our 5-year. Sherman started getting votes when we did our 5-year projection exercise.
Sherman is 27.
Sherman's 27. So and Allen is out 26.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he won't have any necessarily interference there. Go ahead, Kirk. Sorry.
I would just say at the highest level, I mean, my highest level reaction, the good news here is Eric Allen. The bad news here is Ricky Waters. And Fred Taylor just made the finals.
Let's go to running back. Let's talk Fred Taylor then. I mean, like that's I think fresh on our mind. When I opened up and said a head scratcher, bluntly, that's the person I scratch my head at the most. And I've said this to Evan many times. It's not even so much a shot at Taylor. I think any team would be fortunate to have him in his prime for that elongated period of time. But of the running backs available, I just don't get it, how he's here. I didn't get it when he was a semifinalist.
He's here because he's at the top of the rushing list. It's got to be. There's nothing else. What else could it be? He's got one season where he led the NFL in rushing yards per game. I do think that there's, I think he has sort of the misfortune of playing for the Jaguars at the start of their run. They didn't have any history. So, and they're in Florida and he's from, and, he played at Florida. So he doesn't have that Jerome Bettis, Curtis Martin, Neil Anderson. He doesn't have that thing with running backs where if you play in a traditional long-standing franchise or a cold weather club, maybe you're going to be judged a little differently than people were kind of Florida. I mean, if the 99 Jags had at least gotten to the Super Bowl, maybe that would look a little bit differently, but it's got to be rushing yards, right? It's got to be just career rushing yards.
I think there's a couple of things here. One is career rushing yards. Let's go for the simplest explanation.
The simplest explanation.
Right. The other thing I think is there is a piece of he was able to carve a lane of there's not enough Jaguars in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Even if Tony Boselli gets in, that's still one, right? And who's that next one? And some weird dynamic happened along the way where Jimmy Smith was much more recognized in his prime by his peers, by the media of the time. And yet Fred Taylor somehow leapfrogged his own teammate. Because to your point, Jack, Fred Taylor has the career yards compared to the others, but we're rewarding him basically for a couple of dead years in his career where he put up.
Is it because Jimmy Smith did after the NFL, Jimmy Smith served some time and Fred Taylor went into the media? I mean, is it that kind of one guy has great visibility, the other guy has a record?
Well, if I could, so Jack, I think we brought this up in our group, and we were talking a lot about Tiki Barber, a hell of a lot in the group.
Oh, thank goodness Tiki's not in.
Yeah, well,
I don't care if I'm saying that on the record.
I personally still have Tiki over Fred, but I don't have either of them as Hall of Famers. But that's
fair. That's fair.
I'm saying Tiki getting in would just kind of have disrupted the entire conversation that needs to happen. I'm not saying anything.
Sure, but one thing that did happen, and I this is something that I thought. Gary Myers, I believe, is the one who's pounding a lot, was pounding a lot for Tiki. And I thought, maybe, well, so what changed? And my answer to that is access. Does Fred Taylor have access, or does someone have access to Fred Taylor that is pounding the table for him? Maybe
I don't think that we overtly see. It's possible, but it's not like an Eddie George, who literally we know was worked in media for years. Tiki Barber has worked in media for years. I don't think we have that with Fred Taylor, who's always kind of a quiet, unassuming guy. Anybody from Duval football could correct us on that, but I don't think there is.
Well, I know Fred Taylor's been vocal on his own behalf, kind of saying that he feels he belongs. And I don't know if that's kind of getting some conversations started, but
did he do that though, Chris, before he all of a sudden popped into the semis?
I want to say I heard it in the last year. It was before this year, and he's been in the semis for at least 2 years now.
5
years. Okay.
This is and by the way, going back a second, Jack, the next corner who's anywhere even near consideration is Aqib Talib. So in between now and Sherman, Aqib Talib is the only person who I think even has any consideration. I mean, the next best one's probably Leon Hall, which is no one's idea of a Hall of Fame.
So back to the running back stuff.
Well,
and I know
Peanut's already eligible.
Yeah.
Peanuts, I'm just saying new people coming.
Yeah, definitely.
So here's what's annoying about it is the Ricky Waters piece. Everything about Ricky Waters, it seems like how quickly people forget. He didn't win anything, except everywhere he went, they got better, including he won a Super Bowl. And by the way, in Super Bowl 29, he had 3 touchdowns. Like, that's not a nothing. That Chargers defense was really good that year. And, these were not like 3 1-yard goal line touchdowns. Like, if you remember, the first touchdown that Ricky Waters had was like a great reception where he had to break a couple of tackles.
Seam route, straight down the middle of the field.
Yeah, and like, you got to talk about playoff performances mattering. So he's not only got the ring, he also had a 5 touchdown performance against the Giants the year before in the divisional round. You're talking about a guy compared to the other running backs on the list. He had more touchdowns. I know our friend Brian doesn't think touchdowns matter that much. He's wrong. They absolutely do. Like, I think of it as like golf. Anybody that golfs, you drive for show and you putt for dough. And I think of TDs as equivalent to putts. That's what matters at the end of the day. You don't win games with yards, you win games with points. Ricky Waters had more touchdowns than any of these other backs. He was a better pass catcher than at least 2 of the backs, and we could debate whether he was better than Tiki, but he certainly was better in the passing game than Fred Taylor and Eddie George. And I think Jack has hit on this very well, and he could speak to this. The stupidity around the for who, for what crap has grown its own legs over the years, and it needs to stop. Because it's out of context. It's really bad.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, like
it's an embarrassing point to be making when you're talking about someone for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ricky Waters wasn't just like a little bit. I understand what Brian is saying about touchdowns, but Ricky Waters wasn't just like a little bit ahead of the other guys. He was a lot ahead. He was the only guy of the 4 who had offensive touchdowns over 80, and he had 91. Tiki Barber has 55 rushing touchdowns. None of the other 3 backs, and I said this too, none of the other 3 backs had more rushing touchdowns than Cam Newton. Like, it's not like small little differences. I mean, these are really big numbers. And Ricky Waters, like you said, everywhere he went, they won. San Francisco won their first Super Bowl since 1989 with Ricky Waters. Philadelphia went to the playoffs for consecutive years for the first time since I think it was 88-89 or 89-90. Seattle won the division, their first postseason appearance in, 12 years or 99, or 11 years to 88. All 3 of these teams got better. Ricky Waters gets tagged with this like attitude thing, and he wanted to stay in San Francisco. They wouldn't match. And so Ray Rhodes went over as defensive coordinator, took the Philadelphia job, and gets Ricky Waters to come over. So it's not like Ricky Waters was like trying to dip. I mean, he was saying he wanted to come back, and they wouldn't pay him. Everywhere he went, he produced, but that becomes a problem now because you don't have that one voter or that one fan base who's going to be dedicated to boosting Ricky Waters because there's nothing in it for them. There's nothing
That's
in
right.
it. There's nothing in it for San Francisco or Philly or Seattle. I mean, there should be because he made a mark on those franchises. But I'm judging this based on like the amount that they've talked about them, the amount that they've written about them, and just kind of looking at it. Like they're spending their time on all these other people because to them, Ricky Waters, well, he was only here 3 years because he went 3-3-4.
Yes,
And years in each place.
San Francisco's running back is Roger Craig. Like it just is Roger Craig for them. That's who they're pushing.
That's right.
And
So
Waters is never going to get through that.
And here's the other challenge I think for Waters. These are all great things. The other challenge is, I think part of it is, and I know Jack and I were doing some Twitter threads about this recently, talking about the standard with which Ricky Waters is being compared is the wrong one. He should be getting compared to guys like Curtis Martin and guys like Thurman Thomas. Like that's the level that he belongs on. And I think like Edgerrin James as well. He's going to be being compared to these other guys like Tiki Barber and Eddie George and Fred Taylor. Pretty good players, but not on that level. And Ricky somehow is getting bottled in there. But since he's not 17th or whatever it is, like Fred Taylor is on the career rushing yards list, he doesn't pass. And Fred advances.
In 1999, when Barry Sanders retired, ESPN did a feature where they interviewed a bunch of running backs to talk about Barry Sanders. Here's who they interviewed: Thurman Thomas, Emmitt Smith, Terrell Davis, Walter Payton, Jim Brown, Eric Dickerson, Gale Sayers, Ricky Waters.
Thank you.
Curtis Martin had been to a Super Bowl at that point. Jerome Bettis had didn't he have a rushing title, with the Rams? Jerome Bettis had been doing his thing at that point. Marshall Faulk, he wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer in Indy, but he was a Pro Bowler. He was a real good player. They didn't put those guys in there. Again, let me read that list again to talk about Barry Sanders: Thurman Thomas, Emmitt Smith, Terrell Davis, Ricky Waters, Walter Payton, Jim Brown, Eric Dickerson, Gale Sayers.
One of those things is like the other at this moment.
No, one of those things is not like the other, but there are a number of other people you could have gotten it. Yeah, of course, it's one feature. We don't know the behind the scenes. Maybe they reached out to Curtis Martin or Marshall Faulk and they were unavailable. I don't know. They went, all these shoots are from like different places. I mean, it's ESPN in the 90s, like Flush, and they went to wherever these guys were. I just think like he's getting hampered by things that have nothing to do with him. He short-armed a ball in week 1 of a season where he was in the Pro Bowl and his team was in the playoffs. His team wasn't even in the playoffs the year before. He comes over, Philly goes 10-6, he's in the Pro Bowl, and people 3 decades later are still talking about he quickly after the game said for who, for what, which he apologized for within a week. Why are people talking about this? It's an embarrassing thing. And I can imagine that if he did get in the room, the first thing someone would say, well, you know what? Ricky Waters, he's got a real attitude problem. Ricky Waters won everywhere he was. Ricky Waters was able to fit in with Steve Young and Jerry Rice and John Taylor and Brent Jones and Jesse Sapolo and Steve Wallace and Harris Barton, all these guys. I mean, he didn't have any problems in San Francisco that. What's that?
That was an amazing impression, by the way.
You nailed that impression
perfectly.
Yeah. So
well, the fact is too, Ricky Waters did that in Philly, I believe. Somebody can fact check me. His 3 years in Philly, the only other offensive teammate that made the Pro Bowl was Irving Fryer. It certainly wasn't Rodney Peete. Certainly wasn't anybody on that offensive line, as far as I can recall. Like that means something, right, Jack? To your point, is he was the star of that team. He was the guy that came in and helped elevate.
That's correct. Yeah, because actually I have it on a tweet of Randall Cunningham's Pro Bowl offensive teammates. Yep. And yeah, 90, 95, Ricky Waters was the only one. So it's just like, man, you can find any sort of clip on any sort of player where they have one little bad moment. Why is this defining the guy? And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because he's, brash, he's electric, he's emotional, and because it's Philly, it was his first game in Philly, so they didn't have anything else to really go by, so they blew it up, and it's bullshit. I mean, it's a bullshit reason to keep someone out of the Hall of Fame. to keep someone out of the finals to even discuss his case. Now we're going to get into the situation where voters are going to be like, all right, well, we're going to have to work through Fred Taylor because Fred Taylor's not getting in this year. They don't really kick people out. So it's not really a let's get him in the room to discuss their case kind of a thing. That's the other thing about the finalists. It's not really a get him in, let's hear his case. It's like get him in and here he is. And that was something that Gosselin was talking about, was that you don't cycle enough people through. And with the exception of guys who come in really late. So Joe Jacoby had 3 years as a finalist. He didn't get in, but those were his final 3 years of eligibility. Everson Walls had the 1 year. Albert Lewis had the 1 year. But for the most part, and Roger Craig is a weird one. He had 1 year, I think it was 12, where he was in the room and then he fell back. But basically, once you're in the room, you're there. And then eventually they just go, I don't know, this guy's been in the room a really long time. We should vote him in. So you're going to have Fred Taylor, who's going to be going through that. And then all of a sudden, Adrian Peterson's going to be on the ballot. But that's going to be it. Ricky Waters is up, 27? And Peterson's first year is 27. Boom. You can throw Ricky Waters' case right out the window at this point. And that's a shame
Lynch will be coming soon too.
Because that's a shame because his numbers are massive. And now, Evan, like you said, now he goes to the senior pool. And the Niners aren't going to be pushing him because they're dealing with Roger Craig. And, Eagles probably aren't going to be the
Eagles running back is probably Brian Westbrook, right? That's probably
exactly.
But the Eagles barely even push Randall Cunningham.
Well,
let alone any running back, right?
Okay.
That's also
I haven't even seen them push Eric Allen very much.
And Seattle's going to have
Sean Alexander
and
Marshawn Lynch. Yeah,
he's definitely going to push more. I think we've sort of gone through. I think we're all sort of in consensus
we beat the dead horse
on running backs. Yeah.
I would just like to say that Rick Gosselin said that what needs to happen is that they need to have a non-voting meeting in June to discuss all of the candidates. And what I would want to see is a non-voting informational meeting where you discuss guys in 3 groups. First ballot eligible, guys who are of a certain caliber, who have achieved certain marks, guys who you would want to push. First ballot eligible, year 15, year 20. Talk about them all. Gosselin said 2 days. I love it. I love that idea.
Yeah. I just can't see his peers being down with that if they've been hesitant to do other Zoom meetings for other discussions. Which is lazy. I want to just call it out. I don't care.
It's a good idea. Props to Gosselin for coming up with it or mentioning it.
Yeah, I'm glad he's taken our stuff, right? Oh no.
Hey. Thank you, Rick. Good idea.
The one last thing I'd like to say before we move on is Sean Alexander, I think, also has a better argument than Fred Taylor. That's all. And he wasn't even a semifinalist.
It's unbelievable. And this is the other thing,
way to go, Evan. Now you got Jack wound up there.
Now you got me going again because people want to say oh, he had so many 1-yard touchdown runs. So he had 100 rushing touchdowns. You don't nitpick at certain numbers. Sean Alexander has as many receiving slow, flat-footed, non-dynamic. Sean Alexander has as many receiving touchdowns as Tiki Barber.
Mm-hmm. And if you take away, I believe, all the 1-yard rushing touchdowns for Sean Alexander, he still has 20 more rushing touchdowns than Tiki Barber.
It's ridiculous. The guy won an MVP in LaDainian Tomlinson's era, and he was all-decade second team. Where is the explanation for why? I know I talk about beating the dead horse. Where is the explanation for why Sean Alexander was good enough to win an MVP in Tiki Barber's best season? They had the same position. It's their best season. It's Sean Alexander's best season. It's Tiki Barber's best season. Both guys, 2005, same position. And Sean Alexander gets every award. He gets it from the Associated Press. He gets it from the NEA, the players union. He gets it from other voting bodies. He gets the MVP and the Offensive Player of the Year over a guy who now has the inside track on Canton. Someone needs to answer for that. Someone needs to say, I thought this in 2005, but now I think this.
It's called media exposure and media friendliness and media availability, Jack. And it's about high time we start calling out that shit for what it is. Because Tiki Barber's the one that's doing Sunday football games with Matt Ryan on CBS. He's the one that's been Today's Show host. He's the one that's been a public face for years. That's it. Like, there's really not a whole lot of other football argument per se. It's the media availability stuff.
I feel bad because it gets negative so much, and I'm not trying to say that Tiki Barber does not belong in the Hall of Fame or that he should have his case. And you know what? His case is so much better than I thought about it or than I realized, and I've learned a lot from a lot of guys here, Pierce, Brian, and Paul. So that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there are guys who, in their time, at the same time, were having better seasons and have these massive numbers. I mean, you can't just say Sean Alexander 1-yard touchdowns and not at all say Tiki Barber 55 touchdowns. And Tiki Barber even said, I just wasn't good at finding the end zone. He was like, there's an art to it. I just didn't have it. That's why think about it. Think about how many people, when they talk about Tiki Barber, are like, well, he's the Giants' all-time leading rusher, which, by the way, the Giants, for a team since 1925, their last Hall of Fame running back is Frank Gifford, and their second to last is Joe Guyon, and they don't have a third. Okay, so it's not exactly like a runner's paradise.
It's like being a Bears quarterback.
It's like being a Bears quarterback.
Because I think what Jack's hit on here, we're going to see this with some of the other guys, some of the other 15, where you say, what the hell is the difference at this guy?
But he's second to Brandon Jacobs in Giants rushing touchdowns history.
I know, but he also
Yeah.
Okay.
So, should we move something less controversial, like 3 wide receivers?
Well, actually, that's where I was going to go with that. And so we've got Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson, Reggie Wayne. There's zero surprise if we were to say, who do you think? Who do we want? Who do we think if they were going to have 3 wide receivers? I think all of us would have said this is the 3 that they're going to go with because they've all been here before. And I also want to point out, though, in our little group, you all laughed at me. I still maintain Hines Ward will go 20 for 20 and never make the finals.
That would
God bless your heart if that's the case. I don't buy that for a second.
My least favorite football player of all time, Hines Ward.
I think we're at the. Can't be true. I think our question here for the wide receivers. I feel very confident, as much as I'm reticent to predict too much with this group of 50 voters. I feel very confident saying at least one of these wide receivers is getting in if they have to force it when they're in the room. I think the question is it Andre Johnson or Torrey Holt, or is it Andre Johnson and Torrey Holt? That's probably the question at this point. Is it one or is it 2? And does Antonio Gates play into like, hey, we're going to have a tight end, maybe we only have 1 wide receiver?
Well, let's throw Gates in here too, since we're just talking about that. I think Jeff, you're right about. I thought the same thing last year. I thought for sure they're going to try and get 1 wide receiver in, and that didn't happen.
And that was Rondé. I mean, Rondé took the position we thought was going to the wide receiver.
Yeah, yeah. But don't get me wrong, I was very happy for Rondé, but I think we're all mostly in agreement, especially based on sort of conversations that we've all had. I think I'm higher on Reggie Wayne than a lot of people here, but I don't have him higher than Andre or Torrey.
I don't really get the Reggie Wayne thing. I mean, he's here. It's happening. So like whatever. I mean, my thing again, because it always comes off as it does sound disrespectful. I do understand that, but like my thing again is why are we talking about the 8th, 9th, 10th best wide receiver of his era instead of the 3rd, the best fullback or the, 4th, 5th best tackle of the 90s? Like, why are we talking about Reggie Wayne and not Richmond Webb? Like, I know they're 2 different positions, but this is the problem. This is a big part of the problem is that
Kevin Williams.
Or Kevin Williams. Exactly. You're going so far down the line. And, I don't understand also why there isn't, maybe there is, but there should be greater interest in having some kind of coordination. I pitched this on Twitter to Ira Kaufman. I said, why don't you guys just decide, like, we're voting in whoever, I don't care who, Andre Johnson, he's my guy. If you want to say Reggie Wayne, I don't give a shit. Why don't you just say, this is the guy, this is the wide receiver we're voting in this year, and we're going to leave the other 2 wide receivers in the semis so that we can talk about 2 other guys. Let's say Tim McDonald and Leslie O'Neal. And his answer was too much collusion. But like, why not? What's the problem with collusion? Like, you already have agreed that you're going to be electing all three of these guys. You already have said that they're all worthy to you. So like, who cares? I mean, all you're doing now is you're leaving them in these slots. And it's bad for the discourse in the sense that you don't get to talk to other players. It's bad for the discourse in the broader sense because you've got people who don't look at the Hall and you don't study it and just go like, they're snubbing Reggie Wayne. Like, they are not snubbing Reggie Wayne. Like, they have him in the finals.
They're snubbing players. They're snubbing players to artificially keep Reggie Wayne in a spot. So like it should be, Jack, it should be pull these people in. Yes, they're Hall of Famers now. Yes, they're next up. Yes, someday, or no, they're not. And if they're especially in the bottom two categories, then stop pulling them into the damn finals every year, to your point, and taking up one of those 15 precious slots.
Right. Reggie Wayne had a really good career. He's got great numbers. He was someone who was super dependable. You didn't have to think about him. He was going to give you his production. He didn't cause any problems. He seems, by all accounts, to be a great guy, a great leader. He scored in the Super Bowl. He had that one big year. Was it 08, 09? And then he even stayed on, and then he was good with Andrew Luck. I mean, he helped usher in this like post-Peyton era with the Colts. I totally understand it. Like, I'm not like against Reggie Wayne. I'm only against Reggie Wayne in the sense that I don't need to go, and wide receiver was my favorite position. I don't need to go this far down in a position group at when you're keeping out the very best. Like, this really bugged me listening to, again, and I appreciate their transparency. No one else is this transparent. So now they I kind of ding them, but it's only because they're the only ones who are talking. Clark, Ira, and Rick, and they know how I feel about them, especially Clark. But like, they're sitting here saying it's a weak class. And like, they had trouble getting to 15. Like, they're filling out their ballots. They get to 13. They can't figure it out. And I'm like, yeah, because you left Kevin Williams out in the cold, because you left Richmond Webb out in the cold. Like, you left Carnell Lake, you left Eugene Robinson, you left Lorenzo Neal. Like, and if you want to sit here and say, oh, well, it's sort of like a weak class, there aren't, Rick said, oh, there aren't any slam dunks. Devin Hester is as slam dunk as it gets, or just say you're not going to elect any returners, because there aren't 5 guys. There are not 5 people on this ballot who have a better resume than Devin Hester. There aren't 5 players who have better numbers than him. There aren't 5 players who have better impact than him. There aren't 5 players who have a better combination, numbers, and impact. He is the best ever at a position that predates the NFL.
So
if you're going to sit here and say, oh, but there are no slam dunks. Well, yeah, there is. Number 23 in Navy.
Let's focus on the wide receivers and Gates for just a second. I think to the point, I think most of this group feels like it should be Andre first.
I agree with that.
I think the question
first, but I mean, I'm not bothered either way.
Yeah, I don't care.
Either one's fine with me. I don't care.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, Andre or Holt, either one. Prefer both at this point, just to get him the hell out of the damn way. I guess the question becomes, will Antonio Gates, because I think we probably are all in consensus here that Julius Peppers should be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yes.
Is Antonio Gates going to get the same? And I bring that up to say, you look at that touchdown number. When we talk about the things that resonate with voters, it's that statistical dominance, or that statistically understandable significant number. He's got that with touchdowns. It's positional uniqueness. He doesn't have things like championships, but that might not be a big thing for him. But when you think about Gates, would you put him in as first ballot, knowing that he was a guy that was really just, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but he was a glorified slot wide receiver, right? Like, he wasn't doing a bunch of inline blocking. He wasn't doing a bunch of that stuff. He certainly wasn't great at it. Like, he got targeted a lot in that passing game and only had 2,000-yard seasons. So does he advance too much because of the numbers relative to his peer group, even though he wasn't quite like his peer group? Or does he not belong in that first ballot conversation because he was kind of a glorified wide receiver?
I was only talking because no one was talking.
I think he's going to get the first ballot treatment here. I think the touchdown number is going to be what the voters kind of are able to point to and say, he did this better than anybody else at his position. He scored more touchdowns. And I do think that there is I guess you call it like a recency bias with a lot of these voters in that room there. It seems to be with some of the names that have kind of risen to the top as quickly as they have. So I do think that he will be a first ballot guy. If he were, my opinion, if he were to sit a year, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. If it meant getting a Torrey Holt in there or even a Patrick Willis, but just kind of trying to read the tea leaves, read the room, whatever. I think he's going to be the one that joins Julius Peppers as a first ballot guy this year.
So I want to ask Pierce's opinion really quickly. Do you think of both Peppers and Gates as being like those inner circle first ballot Hall of Fame guys? Like, how do you think of Gates particularly?
So it's a little strange because if you compare them to historically who made it at edge and tight end, they're not. Neither of them is. But most people would agree. I think with that watched them that they believe that they are. So it's just kind of a weird dichotomy with the history of the Hall of Fame versus modern perception. But if we look at first ballot edge players, Peppers doesn't belong, I don't think. But I would bet a lot of money he is first ballot.
Would you take Peppers or Ware first, Pierce?
I lean slightly Ware.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't lose sleep if I had Peppers.
See,
how about Peppers or Taylor? Jason Taylor. Because Taylor was a first ballot guy.
Yeah, he's the lowest rung among the group, which kind of suggests that there's not. It's always dependent on who your class is, but just his skill level compared to Bruce, LT, Reggie, it's obviously not at that caliber.
How do you compare Gates to the other two big ones, Gonzalez and Gronk?
I would take Gonzalez and Gronk very, very easily. Gates in the red zone was just an absolute phenom, and everyone jokes, he's a basketball player, former basketball player, but he was very few better at once you get inside.
You muted yourself, Pierce.
Once you get inside the red zone at scoring touchdowns, but once again, I don't think he's at the Gonzalez. But I mean, is that where the line is supposed to be drawn? I'm not certain, but that's where I would draw it.
See,
would you view? I'm sorry, I was going to ask really quickly because I think we all pretty much assume Gronk is going to be first ballot. It would take a massive upset for him not to be. Travis Kelce is going to be a first ballot guy. Period. Like full stop. Like, do we think of Gates in the same light as those two? Let's remove maybe Tony Gonzalez.
See, well, that's where I was going with that because I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that Gates gets compared to Gronk and to Kelce. That's like the next generation, if that makes sense. So if you're looking at Gates's generation, it's Gonzalez and maybe Witten.
And Jason Witten, yeah.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask Pearson, like the same questions. Who would you have, Gates over Witten or Witten over Gates?
I mean, Witten's got way better numbers.
Yeah, but
I'd have to go back and watch a bunch of them again. It's tough. They both played so long. They had towards the end they both had some almost below the line years. So I guess you might kind of get nitpicky if you're talking 5-year peak, 10-year peak, whatever, how you ever want to slice it up. But I would maybe lean Gates.
Okay.
I mean, the thing that Witten's not up for another 2 years. The thing that Witten has going for him is he's third all time in receptions. Like that's just not a number you can.
Cowboy thing doesn't hurt either.
Cowboy
thing it's a Gates thing. Also, he's got one team in the Chargers.
Yeah, that's true. And Witten also has the TV stuff, so that also make a difference. But I would be shocked. The only thing that would shock me is if Gates doesn't make the cut from 15 to 10. That would shock me.
That would be a surprise.
If he ends up like 7th, I'm not going to be that surprised. If he ends up 6th or 7th, I'm not going to be shocked by that at all. I think I'd be much more surprised if Peppers doesn't get in the first ballot than I would if Gates doesn't get in.
Okay, would it be? Sorry, go ahead, Kirk.
Well, no, I was just going to say, but no, but I was going to move on to maybe the defensive ends. But if you got one more point here on this, please make it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Evan, do you think that is? I wouldn't be surprised if Gates is in that 6 to 10 range, but it's because it's 2 wide receivers got voted in. Or would you maybe be surprised if only one of the wide receivers got voted in and Gates was still in that 6 to 10 group?
That would surprise me more if he was a one. Like, I mean, we're looking at this. It's going to be Peppers, and I'm presuming a wide receiver. I'm presuming an offensive lineman +2, right? So I'd be surprised if there wasn't a second wide receiver in
You're
Gates. ends up
presuming an
there.
offensive lineman gets in?
I
Yeah, I don't know.
there- I don't. Well, we'll see. Well, we'll get there in a second.
Okay.
Should we go to defensive ends since we talked about?
Yeah, because I would put some money on both of these defensive ends potentially
Oh,
making it
please
this
no.
year.
Jeff's ready to bite a neck over there.
All right, so we got three defensive ends.
Like Dracula.
Jack.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
actually, hold on. Let me go, Jeff. Let me go back a second. I would not be shocked if there's only one wide receiver and the other one is Hester. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So if Hester and a wide receiver and Gates is getting that one shot.
That would actually surprise me a little bit considering Devin moved from the 6 to 10 to the 11 to 15 last year. Like, I
Which
would
is
be very
fine.
happy with it. Certainly, I know Jack would do backflips. Like, but I would be surprised if Hester was one of the 5 this year. I know we'll get to him in a
Fine.
moment, but
All right,
go
so
ahead, Kirk.
yeah, so let's go to the 3 defensive ends that we have. Again, no surprises as to who they are. The aforementioned Julius Peppers, Jared Allen, who is back, and Dwight Freeney.
Golly, can I blast on this Dwight Freeney stuff
Go
for a
ahead.
moment? Let me clarify. Like, I personally don't think Dwight Freeney was a Hall of Famer. I don't think Robert Mathis was a Hall of Famer. I think these are 2 guys that when you take a step back, you realize the reason they're in this spot now, the reason they got a lot of the media attention, the postseason and accolades they did, was the Peyton Manning effect. We don't often think about the quarterback and how much impact they had on other players getting their spotlight. But think about in the 2000s, how many marquee primetime major and playoff games that Dwight Freeney played in. Yet when you look at his numbers, I could go into the Leslie O'Neal crap. Leslie O'Neal had more double-digit sack seasons. He could do way more on a football field than Dwight Freeney did. You know, you talk about more career sacks. Leslie O'Neal had that. I look at him, Dwight Freeney, compared to even a John Abraham. So another peer, right? Similar type of thing. Here's a distinction. John Abraham had 4 double-digit sack seasons where he was not named to the Pro Bowl out of his 8. Dwight Freeney had one. Dwight Freeney had 1 such double-digit season where he wasn't voted to the Pro Bowl. Like that's a big thing. That talks about that media attention. That talks about that spotlight that Dwight Freeney was always under. And, you know, to me, this is not trying to sit there and differentiate and say like an Abraham was better. I view him as like similar type of players. I maybe think Abraham was slightly better against the run, but neither was like a stalwart. I don't think Pierce would probably agree. Neither one of them was like a stalwart against the run. Certainly Freeney had his issues. I come back to that 2006 Colts defense. Freeney that year was a nothing. He had 5.5 sacks. Everybody remembers that 06 Colts run defense was historically god-awful, butthole bad when Bob Sanders was out. It was Bob Sanders that was the most important player on that defense. It was Bob Sanders that made the difference. It was Dwight Freeney that then went into the Super Bowl against John Tate and he got his shit pushed in. Like nobody talks about John Tate as a Hall of Famer, nor should they. Shout out to John Tate. But in Super Bowl 41, when you go back and watch, John Tate did work on Dwight Freeney. You didn't hear shit from him in that game. And I'm just astounded that I can understand the Jared Allen piece because I think he was more dominant as an edge rusher. Like he was one-dimensional too, but he was much better at that one dimension than Dwight Freeney was. I just can't understand for the life of me why there was this incessant need to make now Dwight Freeney a multiple-time finalist. Because his career sack numbers are not that impressive. There are other candidates with as many or more double-digit sack seasons at him that played in a similar era. The only explanation, justification I can think of, it's the Peyton Manning effect. Because even when you point to like all pros and Pro Bowls, Well, that ties directly into fan votes for the Pro Bowl. How often did they watch John Freeney or Dwight Freeney versus a John Abraham on the Colts?
And you know what they were always saying in those Colts games to your point? They would always be like, and don't forget there's a defense on this team.
Right. And think about like
Bob Sanders, who will never get
I think about a guy like
Bob
Leslie
Sanders
O'Neal.
scared the hell out of us, man.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah, like think about this though. What could a Leslie O'Neal have done sack wise if he could say, you don't have to play the run at all. We're not going to bounce you around and have you do a bunch of coverage stuff as a 3-4 outside backer for a period of time either. You just rush the quarterback. I feel like Bill Cowher yelling at Gray Lloyd. Rush the quarterback. That's basically what Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis did. And I would debate like how great they really were at it. Because there were even seasons where Abraham had more sacks and as many forced fumbles as Dwight Freeney and didn't make the Pro Bowl, but Freeney did. Abraham has more career sacks, as many career forced fumbles, and yet he can't make the 25. Freeney is a multiple-time top 15 guy. Make it make sense, gentlemen.
Freeney is 8th in sacks amongst defensive ends who are eligible for the Hall of Fame at the moment. Number 1, of course, is Peppers.
Yo, this is crazy because Jeff said that there were 4 seasons where John Abraham was double-digit sacks. One of those was 2008 with the Falcons. He had 16.5 sacks. Here are the defensive ends in the NFC who made it over him. Peppers at 14.5, Jared Allen at 14.5, Justin Tuck at 12. So Justin Tuck, the Giants had that monster season after their Super Bowl win. Peppers, Carolina 08, I think they had the bye that year. They were real good.
But the Falcons made the playoffs that year in Matt Ryan's rookie year, did they not, in 2008?
2008, they absolutely did. And Minnesota made the playoffs because that was the year that we got knocked out in week 17. They got in, they got in instead. So, I mean, I'm just like looking at this. Yeah. Forced fumbles, Peppers with 5, Abraham with 4, the other 2 guys with 3 sacks. I said Abraham has him on sacks. Justin Tuck had the only interception of the 4. So no one else had an interception. Justin Tuck had 1. He took it to the house, 41 yards. And that's just bonkers. I mean, what is it the tackles? He's low on tackles. I don't know. Does that matter?
I mean, according to Hall of Fame Monitor, he's a second best defensive end not in the Hall. I don't know if people look at that, but
he had 30 QB hits that year, top of those 4. Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm sorry, he's third best. JJ Watson eligible, second best eligible. On
who are you saying is the third best?
Pro Football Reference's Hall of Fame Monitor for defensive ends. He's Peppers is the best who's eligible, and then Freeney is second.
Do we think that there's any chance?
Which means he's getting bumped up by the team's success because that's crap.
I'm just letting you know that's right.
Yeah, no, I agree. That Jeff points out like the flaw in that.
I think all of us have him at the third spot. I would also think that most of us would probably agree. At least this is what I think, anyway. I don't see him overtaking either Peppers or Jared, like in the voters' mind.
Freeney?
Yeah.
No, but he's just going to be there until he's in camp.
Yeah.
He's just going to be holding a spot. And Jeff, you said you were like, I don't see why he has to be a multi-time finalist. I think that's the right question posed the wrong way. And the way that I would pose it is he didn't need to be a first ballot finalist. Because
that's what I'm saying.
But that's the reason that he's coming, and I would like people to better understand what goes on, because that's the reason that he's going to be on repeat now, is because, and this is why I keep saying they need to find a way to untether the formal discussion from the label of finalist, because now you get into a thing where it's like, well, we don't want to say he's been a finalist. Now we can't say he's not a finalist. That's disrespectful. So they need to find a way to do that. I mean, the way that I look at it is that like anyone who is a finalist should be someone who you could accidentally elect him that year and you'd be okay with it. And anyone who's a semifinalist should be someone you could accidentally end up with them in the finals and you'd be okay with it. I would, they need to start doing something. They're never going to do this, I don't think. But like we talked about this, give us a number, give them a cap. So you can't be in the semis more than 5 years. After that point, you have to move up or down. And that might lower the urgency on some guys and increase the urgency on others. If they had something like that in place, I don't think anyone thought, oh, we're going to elect Dwight Freeney to the Hall of Fame in 5 years. But they couldn't think of any other players because they have this limited scope of who needs to be in these conversations. So instead of going to the back end of the ballot and saying, where has Richmond Webb been? Where has Tim McDonald been? Where has Leslie O'Neal been? Where has Albert Lewis been? Where has Reuben Brown been? Where has Steve Wisniewski been? Instead of doing that, Carnell Lake, Eugene, whoever. Instead of doing that, Henry Thomas. All right. Instead of doing that, they go, all right, well, who's the big name who's now eligible? Because, you know, when the Hall releases that prelim list, they release that list of first-year eligible guys, and it's everybody. But, you know, you look on there, and you're like, oh, well, Dwight Freeney's eligible this year. Oh, okay, Dwight Freeney. I don't think that there's any sense of like, well, Dwight Freeney, yeah, we're going to elect him, you know, in 5 years, so it's okay to make him a finalist this year. It's just kind of like, oh, I don't know who else should go. So that's the problem that I have, is that, like, Jeff, I disagree with you. I like Dwight Freeney for the Hall of Fame, but he didn't need to be here this early, because now he's taking this slot, and slowly it's just going to be like, well, he's here. He's a 5-time finalist, and that like becomes part of his resume. But when you look at like Dwight Freeney, who was the number one guy you thought of on that defense, Jeff?
I think you're slightly skewing where I'm coming from on this. I personally don't agree that he's a Hall of Famer.
No, I know that. No, I know you don't.
Hold on. Let me finish. That said, my bigger contention is, and I've even posted on this, tweeted about this, etc., is why did he have to be a multi-time finalist already and Leslie O'Neal never was? What is so special and different about a Dwight Freeney compared to a John Abraham, like we just talked about, right? And I think that's where I'm getting to, is I'm expecting the voters to be made of a little bit tougher stuff when it comes to some of these guys, and being able to research this and understand these differences, and being able to highlight, you may think Dwight Freeney is a Hall of Famer someday. Fine, I could concede the point. He doesn't need to be a guy that gets in the first 3 or 4 years, because the resume is just really not there, especially when you look at some of the peers and when you get away from some of the like fan and like media exposure bias that's there. It's just not.
Okay, taking Freeney out of this for a second.
Yeah, Jared Allen's a bigger conversation.
So Jared Allen.
Well, Jared Allen's the same thing. I think of Bob Sanders when I think of that Colts D, and I think of Kevin Williams when I think of that Vikings D. They're just not the first guy.
Yeah, the Williams wall, right? Even
it doesn't make sense.
Put Pat Williams maybe put in front of Allen, but of course Allen had the time in Kansas City as well. I just think if we all think Peppers is going in, we're not going to spend a ton of time discussing him. Does that preclude Allen in everybody's mind?
I don't think so.
I think there's a chance Allen gets in this year because they moved him up to the 6 to 10. Like,
I do too.
Feel like he could be one of the 5.
See, I think he gets precluded and is a shoe-in for next year. I think that once you have Peppers out, there's no defensive ends coming next year.
Darrelle Revis didn't impact Rondé Barber this past year.
True.
That is true.
Yeah,
that's the one. That's the one. I could see them going with Jared Allen, but I think again, part of it will now be, and this gets to what Jeff was saying, part of it will now be like, well, he's just been here for a while. He's been on the finals for a while. Like, I don't know, we got to like get him in. And to me, it says that when they get these preliminary lists and they get to check those preliminary lists, so it's crazy some of the names that they've left off. They're looking at the front of the ballot and they're not looking at the back of it. So it becomes self-fulfilling. So they sit there and they go, well, Jared Allen's been a finalist, you know, for whatever 3-4 years now, so he's a Hall of Famer. Leslie O'Neal hasn't been a finalist, so how is he a Hall of Fame? Like they've sort of like just kind of accepted that some of these guys who were elite players, I mean, great, like Greg Lloyd missed his entire last year of eligibility because nobody put him on the prelim list.
Mm-hmm.
No one nominated him. No one said, and no voter looked at that list and went, hold on a second here. Greg Lloyd on a defense with Rod Woodson, Kevin Green, Chad Brown. Who am I missing? I'm missing a big one.
Carnell Lake.
Yep.
Yeah.
Greg Lloyd scared the shit out of people, out of grown men, good, great football players. Greg Lloyd was bad. I mean, bad. And no voter, 50 voters or 48, whatever it was that year, nobody looked at that list and said, hold on a second here, where's Greg Lloyd? And he just lost his whole eligibility. Year 20, gone. Because no one looked at the list and said, wait a second.
I think we put in, and I can't imagine some of the voters, like I feel very comfortable in saying this. I cannot picture some of those voters spending a whole lot of time doing deep dives and researching on it like some of us do. Like you have 100%. Historians, passion projects, etc. Right? And when you see some of the discourse that they engage in via social media, even on podcast stuff, it exposes to me like how much they don't research some of these things. It's a lot of that shit you're talking about, Jack. It's the front of the football card, not the back of it.
They're depending on the research of other people who are going to present people on the
room. And I think, Jeff, to that point too, these are just the ones that we know about. And I'm not trying to rag on Lisa Salters, but how much work does she actually spend on this? Does she have time?
It's a fair question, right?
Like I'm not trying to single her out, but again, she's pretty much busy every week, doing multiple things. Like, how much history does she actually know? She might know a hell of a lot. I mean, but is that her? That's not even close to what her main focus is. It can't be, not at this stage of her career. And she's not the only one like that.
I think it's fair for like a number of those voters to question that, right? I think it absolutely is. Because that would be one of those names I would look at and I say, I don't know that when I look at like the body of work, that doesn't scream to me football historian. And even with some of these other writers, when I see some of the things they put, I say that doesn't scream to me like a deep, meaningful understanding of the game of football. It's more of like, I got to push the person that's in my market, be damned anything else kind of deal sometimes, right?
And that, what we saw with Gary Myers was, I mean, on the one hand, it's frustrating to see. I mean, he's pushing Tiki Barber without a sense of who else is in that, should be in that discussion. On the other hand, if I was a Giants fan, I'd feel really good about that. I mean, on the sense, like, is a selector supposed to be a defense attorney who's a zealot at, there's zealous advocacy is, part of the lawyer code or whatever. Like, is he supposed to be, or he or she's supposed to be like a defense attorney where it's like, don't tell me what you did, we're just going to present the best possible case? Or are they supposed to be a little bit more impartial and a little bit, have a higher level look at things? But yeah, I mean, that if I was a Giants fan, I'd be like, yeah, go Gary. And it would be frustrating as a Dolphins fan to see how little Armando Salguero has tweeted about and written about. I mean, I checked his clips at the Miami Herald. He hasn't pushed Richmond Webb one bit. So if you don't have him pushing and you don't have fans pushing, and you like, that's just
it's a reason if you're not doing it publicly, you're not doing it very much private.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, we would look at somebody like a Gary Myers, for example, and say, right or wrong, depending on the circumstance, he's pushing for these people in private.
He's
we know he is. Like, if I was a Giants person. Meanwhile, you see like a recent interaction with like Ira Kaufman and Chidi Ahanatu talking about Hardy Nickerson. And I know Hardy Nickerson wasn't a semifinalist, not a finalist, but it's a valid point. When you look at Hardy Nickerson's resume, if he played at other positions like wide receiver, like quarterback, he damn sure at least would be in the semifinals, if not in the finals.
Or maybe even in other markets.
Yeah, if he was in another market. But the thing is like, is it that voter that represents that market doesn't think he has a chance, so he doesn't push him, or he doesn't believe he is a Hall of Famer, so he doesn't push him? And I wonder, Jack, if there's dynamic.
That's the question I've had with everyone who follows us at all knows, and I'm the Kevin Williams guy, like the Patriots fan, the Kevin Williams guy, right? I'm wondering if we start seeing Kevin Williams as soon as Jared Allen is gone from the list. If he's just like, hey, I can get Jared Allen in, I'm going to force Jared Allen until he's in, and then we got time on Kevin Williams, I can go back to him. Like, it's dumb, but I kind of feel that's where we are in a lot of these things.
Because Jared Allen's case to the voters would feel like the one that's easier to understand, requires less context.
Sacks are easier to understand than anything a defensive tackle does. They are.
especially
And a cowboy dance is easier to understand than Kevin Williams didn't really have a thing.
He just dominated.
Or the 8th best wide receiver stats are easier to understand than anything Lorenzo.
That's right.
Yeah. Should we move on to our next one?
Safety.
Yeah, we got the two safeties.
Yeah, we could do that. Let's go to the safeties here. Right, we only have the one, right?
We have two. We have two.
Woodson
Aaron Woodson and Rodney Harrison.
That's right. Yeah, Darren Woodson and Rodney Harrison. Yeah.
And let me just say, as a Patriots fan, I was not expecting Rodney Harrison to get this far.
I was mildly surprised, but there had to be at some point there has to be somebody from those Patriots teams that makes the finalist group, right? You've had Richard Seymour.
I just thought Will Fork was next up. I also thought the Patriots fans' inability to elect oh my God, it just went on my head, offensive lineman, played for us and then went to Tampa.
Armstrong?
No. He what?
Logan Mankins?
Logan Mankins, thank you.
Yeah.
The pick that almost made Mel Kiper's head explode when the Patriots picked him for the last pick of the round. Mel Kiper's like, the Patriots have no idea what they're doing. He's a terrible player. And then, Pro Bowler. I thought that those two guys were ahead of Harrison. I love Rodney Harrison. All Patriots fans love Rodney Harrison. San Diego fans should love Rodney Harrison. He's an incredible player for a very long time. He only made 2 Pro Bowls in his entire career. He had an interception that won a Super Bowl, and he had an inability to knock this ball out of the stickum from David Tyree's head that lost another. I mean, that play essentially didn't lose another Super Bowl. But
so here's I want to hit on this before I forget about it. It's interesting because after the finalist group, I think Rick Gosselin, who's the Dallas market voter, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to probably be the one that's presenting, defending, advocating for Darren Woodson's case. Mm-hmm. It was interesting in his article, and I thought, it struck me, and I said at the time, I'll just own it. Like I said, this is really stupid because I thought it was. He lumped Tim McDonald into the thumper category, which is ridiculous, and put Darren Woodson in the ball hawk category, even though Tim McDonald in a similar number of games had 17 more interceptions, more defensive touchdowns. If you do the side-by-side comparison statistically with Tim McDonald, Darren Woodson, Rodney Harrison, you guys have seen some of the stuff I posted, some stuff that Jack's posted. There's a clear winner here, and it's not even close, and it's Tim McDonald. It just is. So, what's the difference? And that's not to say, Woodson should be the next safety up at this point, because he's been there in the finals now multiple times. Let's hurry up and get him through. I think it's still going to be another year or two for him. But it's fine that he gets in, but he should not be getting in before Tim McDonald. And that's a crime. What happened here is in year 20, because of that lack of formal conversation, that lack of collusion, the better safety now goes to the senior abyss where he potentially never gets in because he's never even had the conversation, right? He's going to sit there with Deron Cherry, Joey Brown, or Nolan Cromwell and go nowhere. Meanwhile, I'm going to look and say, he was better than Harrison. He was better than Darren Woodson. He was more than a thumper. He was great in coverage. He could play the run. He could do all of that. The process let Tim McDonald down. Go ahead.
Harrison also has that one stat that a lot of people like to quote: all the players in the history of the NFL with 30 sacks and 30,
yeah.
It's Harrison and Ray Lewis, and that's it. That's the list.
Do we think either of these have a shot this year, though? I mean, I don't.
I mean, I think Woodson has a better shot than Harrison if this is Harrison's first time.
Yeah.
I mean, Woodson has the Cowboys behind him,
and his clock is it's not running out, but he's further along.
Year 16.
Year 16.
I think I would say the one thing that might prevent a Woodson from advancing, he could get into that 6 to 10 tier this year. I think that's possible. I'm just thinking, if I'm the person that's presenting and defending Rodney Harrison, I'm attacking things like Rodney Harrison's one of 2 people with 30 sacks, 30 interceptions. He has more career interceptions and career fumbles or career turnovers forced than a Darren Woodson. He also played on championship teams. So there is an angle where you could make to say in a presentation in a room of 50 voters, you could make a play for Harrison over Woodson just enough to split the vote, and neither one of them advances.
Yeah, and Harrison, defensive captain on two very good defenses. So he and Sayao were the two captains in San Diego. So I don't think either of them get in. I think if one's more likely this year at least, though, it is Woodson.
I don't know if we have a whole lot, I guess, more on this topic. This one I think will be pretty quick because we've got two standalones, and both of them we have inducted in our mock process already. So obviously, this entire group is happy that Patrick Willis is here. We hope that he's going to get in. Whether he does or does not, I don't know. Same with Devin Hester. So we have one linebacker, one special teams god. I'll go with Jack on that one. So I think we're all happy they're here. None of us should be surprised they're here because they're finalists before. Do they get in? Is really what I want to ask here.
I would put them both in personally.
Do they? Do they get in 2024?
I think either could. I get the sense that maybe Devin's not. I mean, what Dan Pompei told Larry Meyer at ChicagoBears.com last year was that the debate on Devin Hester was snap counts. And we had talked, Jeff had mentioned that he went from the top 10 his first year of eligibility to the top 15 last year that he dropped. And something that Paul has talked about is the silent assassin. So I suspect also because of what Dan said that there were voters, I don't want to say guys, could have been women, but there were voters who weren't talking about this in 2022, his first year. And then last year, maybe having seen, he got to the 10, all of a sudden they're going to bring up this snap count thing. So if they're still talking about snap counts, I have a feeling that he has a few more years. Devin, I'm still confident will get in. Again, looking at the trends, every first ballot finalist has gotten in within 6 years, but the one guy who bucks all of the trends is Steve Tasker, who's the only person to make the semis in his first 5 years and become a senior. And he's got, I think, the most. So him and Roger Craig maybe have the most semifinalist selections. I think he has the most semifinalist selections without ever making the finals. So
but Heinz Ward is saying, "Hold my beer."
So if there's one guy who is problematic when you're trying to get a handle on, as Chris said, reading the tea leaves based on the voting trends, it's Steve Tasker, which means it's Devin Hester as well. But I think that Hester ultimately will be fine. I think Patrick Willis ultimately will be fine. I could see one of the two of them getting in. I would be surprised if they both did. But again, you said special teams god, and that has to count. I mean, there aren't how many players on this ballot can you apply God to? How many players on this ballot can you say?
For me, only one.
How many players on this ballot can you say are the clear-cut best ever at the thing that they did? And the answer is one. Devin Hester. He's the only one. So I just want voters to just say, look, he's the best. And if you're not going to elect the best, then just fucking say we're not going to elect any returners. Just say it and then move on with your lives. Because if you're not going to elect Devin Hester, then just say you're done with returners. But I don't think that's the case because they wouldn't have made him a first ballot finalist. I mean, it's him and Jan Stenerud are the only special teamers to be first ballot finalists. Jan Stenerud is first ballot Hall of Famer. So I'm not concerned in that respect. Obviously, they respect him. They obviously value his case. But Devin Hester needs to go in this year because there's no reason to keep him out. I mean, if you're not going to do what we've all talked about and honor the back end of the ballot, I mean, if they were going to go like Peppers, Eric Allen Woodson, wide receiver, Willis, fine. But they're not going to do that. So if you're not going to do those things, if you're just going to be top 5 in it, Devin Hester's in the top 5.
Yeah, I know you don't agree with me, Jack, and that's fine. You could be wrong.
I rarely agree with you.
Kidding. You are. I think you may be a little bit in this case. I think the challenge still is with the special teams label. And I worry a little bit when you get into that room, snap count becoming a thing, right? is you have to talk about like the contact to damage ratio. I always think I think I gave you the example before of like Sammy Sosa, right? Yeah, he might strike out 150, 160 times a year, but he hits 60 home runs, so who gives a shit? Like Devin Hester, with considering the way he was deployed, the role that he had, and the amount of impact and damage he could cause, not just as a returner, but also as a wide receiver at times. You know, that's got to be part of the story. And I even think about the special teams stuff, if we want to talk about that. Like, it is easy for people to think they might just think about the Super Bowl and say, okay, he returned one, so that's why the Colts stopped kicking it to him. There were years in the league where teams, everything that they did was designed to sacrifice field position to not have Devin Hester kill them. So, like, to me, there's got to be a way to quantify that or make some of those voters, when they talk about snap count, like, I don't give a crap if a guy, like, does every wide receiver that plays 60 snaps a game and has 5 catches for 60 yards, did they really have a meaningful impact on the game? I say bump that. A lot of times they did. I can say for an extended period of time in Devin Hester's peak, he could not touch the ball once and have a massive impact on the game.
Yeah, I've quantified a lot of this, and I've recorded a lot of this. So we're loading. Dan Pompei is ready. We have loaded him up with all the ammo necessary. But I mean, you mentioned like the idea of like the Sosa idea, or like the wide receiver idea. Devin Hester in our Super Bowl season in 2006 did not have a touch on. He didn't play offense. He played some corner, but he didn't have a takeaway. So he did not have a touch on offense or defense. Looking at the entire team, Thomas Jones led the team with 35% of the touches. Devin Hester, 7.2% of the touches. Percentage of yards, Thomas Jones, 17.5. Devin Hester, 15.9.
Ooh. And then when you look at the touchdowns, right? Like, how many touchdowns did Thomas Jones have that year?
I would have to check 7 or 8, I think.
But look at how many more touches he had in order to get those touchdowns versus Devin Hester. Like, I will always maintain, and I'll go to my grave believing this, that the most valuable player in the league in 2006 was Devin Hester. It absolutely was, because bullshit on the quarterback. When you talk about what was the fundamental key difference between 2005 and 2006 for the Bears, where they went from a 10-win team to a Super Bowl team that should have beat them overrated ass Colts in the Super Bowl, the answer is Devin Hester. Like, you can clearly point to a tangible difference that one player made.
And the one key game planning choice that the Colts made in that Super Bowl was to take Devin Hester out of the game. That was what they did. They looked at an entire team. They looked at a team that had Brian Urlacher. I know, Evan, you're checking the clock, man. I'm sorry. I'm going to be like my.
Oh no, I'm checking.
Making my Oscar speech over here. They looked at a team that had Brian Urlacher at his peak, that had Lance Briggs at his peak, that had a really good ground game. I mean, look at what Thomas did to that team. 112 yards on, I think it was just 18 carries. I mean, he was, or maybe less than that, 15 carries. I mean, he was 15 carries. Yeah, sorry. We had 19 carries overall. Jesus. So, I mean, Thomas Jones was killing them. We had Urlacher. We had Briggs. And the guy who they wanted to take out of the game was Devin Hester. There's an amazing clip, week 3, 2007. This is Devin Hester's second season. We had a Monday night game against the Cowboys. The Cowboys kicked off out of bounds. The opening kickoff.
Intentionally.
And John Madden was just like, yeah, that was the right thing to do. They kicked off out of bounds, like on purpose. And Kansas City did that the week before. And teams were just like, I don't know what else am I supposed to do?
It's intentionally walking Barry Bonds.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's exactly it. And I think like that transcends special teams. And what I'm trying to call out here is like, that's the thing that when the voters focus on snap count, I think the focus here is misplaced.
It's misplaced.
It is absolutely misplaced. When you talk about a contact to damage ratio, when you talk about, I love that analogy to the intentionally walking Barry Bonds. Like, they were intentionally walking Barry Bonds when the bases were loaded. Yeah. Right? When it was a run game because they were afraid he was going to hit a 3-run
Pre-steroids, Barry Bonds was intentionally walk with the bases loaded.
There's a season for Barry Bonds. I know, a completely different thing. He had more times on base than he had plate appearances.
That's right, because teams were so afraid of him. And I think there is a similarity there those first 4 or 5 years in Chicago, especially as you get to like 2007 to 2008, 2009, when some of the return numbers drop. Some will say, well, that was because of him playing wide receiver more. No, that was because teams stopped kicking to him for those couple of years. And when they started kicking to him again in 2010, he started killing their asses again.
I mean,
Right.
Devin, there's a lot of points to be made about Devin. And I wrote a few weeks ago, I wrote one article a day on Windy City Gridiron looking at just the statistical argument for Devin Hester. But the one thing that I want to mention is that the big number that ended up on the forefront of everybody's minds about Devin was the 20 touchdowns and the idea that he had the return touchdown record, and they talk about it against Dion, and that Dion had 19 and he had and Devin had 20. So they frame it as if he only beat this record by one touchdown. But the reality is that he was already so far, he had blown the special teams record so far out of the water that they had to make this new thing up where he was now chasing Rondé Barber, Rod Woodson, and Deion Sanders for total return touchdowns. And all those guys have defensive touchdowns. Devin didn't have any defensive touchdowns. These are just return touchdowns. So when you think about his record, when you think about 20 TDs, it's not 20 versus 19. It's 20 versus 13. That's Brian Mitchell.
That's right. And I want to call out here one other thing, Jack, is if Rondé Barber's defensive touchdowns got him over the hump, what do you say about the guy that almost doubled that total? Right? With limited touches, with limited opportunities. I know I'd like to talk about Patrick Willis for a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, before you get there, I just realized Kirk's face reminded me. I said more plate appearances. He had more times on base and at bats, not plate appearances.
Yeah.
I said the wrong thing. Sorry, Paul. I wanted to correct that. Correct him like, how's that possible? I was like, I said the wrong thing.
We spend way too much time together for people who've never met.
Yeah, I am curious here, like Pierce. I'm trying to think like Patrick Willis. Where do you rank him in terms of all-time inside linebackers? Is he in a similar level of Gradishar? Maybe Gradishar is like 6 or 7. Willis is like 7 and 8. Like, how do you rate Patrick Willis all-time inside linebackers?
Yeah, I would put him there.
I'm trying to think of why does, and Kirk, like Evan, Chris, this maybe is a question. Why do the voters, because I don't even really want to hear the short career argument anymore, because it wasn't like Darrelle Revis played for 15 years and dominated for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they so slow to advance linebackers, specifically middle linebackers? Outside linebackers that don't rush the pass is a whole different conversation, but Zach Thomas just got in. I personally would put Patrick Willis first. I think most of us might have, right?
That's the cue right there.
I don't know how Bryant Young passed him, his teammate. Like, I'll never understand that one.
And I'm wondering, like, because, well, it helps when you've got the organization is like getting a Zoom call where they get a bunch of player testimonials. But why did they do that for Bryant Young and not for Patrick Willis, who I would agree, like, when I looked at the 49ers, I'm like, Patrick Willis was a better player. I know some other guys are certainly much higher on Bryant Young than I was. I thought he was more of a borderline guy. Other people felt he comfortably belonged in. Fine, whatever. Like, still felt he someday he belongs in Canton. But Patrick Willis was a monster.
So,
like, how quickly we forget, right?
Yeah. So Willis had 7 seasons as a starter, 7 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pros. Zach Thomas had 12 years as a starter, 7 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pros. So they had the exact same thing. Willis just did it in 5-year seasons. So I don't have a good reason for you other than the cue as to why Zach Thomas got in first. Again, according to that same Pro Bowl reference Hall of Fame tracker, the average inside linebacker has a score of 109. Zach Thomas is 110.3. Patrick Willis is 110.6. So they're both ahead of the average linebacker according to that measurement. The only other person who's not in the Hall of Fame who is above them is Luke Kuechly. And Kuechly's coming up next season. Yep. So that list, just by the way, is Ray Lewis, Mike Singletary, Jack Lambert, Dick Butkus, Kuechly, Urlacher, Willis, Thomas. Then that's the average. Right below that's Bobby Wagner, Nick Bonaconte, Ray Nitschke, Randy Gradishar. I mean, that's where you are with all this stuff. I personally think this is a fantastic ballot for Willis.
Yeah, could be.
I mean, I think that I don't think Peppers has any effect on Willis. And I think if you're gonna make this decision, it's much more likely that the second defensive player in is Willis than say Allen or Woodson, who seem to be the next two people up.
And I think here's my thing. Like if you talk about some of the voters struggling to come up with 15 Hall of Famers, I think it's very clear that most all of them would probably list Patrick Willis as one of the ones they would say is a Hall of Famer. To me, at some point, that should carry some weight in the damn process of let's just hurry up and get this damn guy through so he's not taking up a spot and he's not waiting longer than he needs to. Because he retired, what, 2014?
That's I think I'll double check that. I think that's right.
Yeah, because I think he came into the league in
07 through 14.
So he's on his 5th year on the ballot, technically.
Yeah.
Because he started 2020. Like, I could understand because of the shorter career, maybe he doesn't make it first ballot. Although, I think, like, I go back to Darrelle Revis. Like, Darrelle Revis really had 7 to 8 peak seasons. Revis got more media attention. He had the Revis Island nickname. Willis was a better player, my opinion, right? I think you could do more with Willis. He was able to do more. He dominated more of the game. To me, he should be one of the 5 this year. I don't think he will be, but I think he absolutely should be.
How about you, Chris? We haven't heard from you in a while, my friend.
Yeah, please.
Yep. So I totally agree that Patrick Willis belongs in the conversation for one of the 5 spots. I think the last couple of years, there's probably some vote splitting between him and Zach Thomas that kind of kept both of them held back a bit. So they never really advanced into that, 6 to 10 range. They kind of kept hanging in that 15 to 11 range. But I'm a big Willis believer. I think what he did and the short career thing, that's out the window now with Baselli, with Kenny Easley, with Terrell Davis. That's no longer an argument that any voters can make to kind of hold people back. So yeah, I think with him, it could be this year. And I think it would come down to do we do 2 wide receivers or do we do 1 wide receiver and, a wild card, a fifth player?
There always seems to be one, doesn't there?
There does, right? It feels like most years we feel good about who 3 or the 4 are. And then the 5th one is totally off the wall. I know who we didn't talk about yet. This is very
The 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the 2 offensive linemen.
I thought I'd save that for last because I think it was sort of interesting. And especially for me, because, the 2 offensive linemen, it's Willie Anderson and Jari Evans. I have not pushed Jari. You'd think I would as a diehard Saints fan. And I'm very big on Jari's candidacy. I didn't push him in our other groups because there are other offensive linemen who are waiting a little bit longer. And so I've been thinking in that direction. So the 2 offensive linemen, I think if we were all to sort of like say which 2 offensive linemen we want to see as finalists, I don't know that any of us would pick these 2. Am I wrong in that?
Wisniewski's my guy who I want to at least get in the room and have some conversation about. So I mean, I'd do Wisniewski and Webb would be my 2 I'd probably put in.
I think if you like I might say Mangold and there might be some along with Thomas Hall that would say like Tom Nalen, right?
Tom Nalen.
But I think it's a really powerful point you're bringing up, Kirk. To me, it's not about should Jari Evans be in the Hall of Fame. I do think he meets the Hall of Fame standard.
Oh, I totally do, obviously. But I mean,
I think my question is why does he have to get so far in the process so early relative to some others?
I think who was it who said that's when you see that list and then you see that asterisk, right, with the first year, and then recency bias, and I could be mistaken here, Evan, you might know this better because like you always sort of like track all this year by year, but it feels to me, even in the brief time that I've been really paying so much attention to it, that recency bias has played a much bigger factor in the last 5 years than maybe the 5 years before that and before that. I could be wrong on that, but it just feels that way to me.
Like the Robert Mathis being he's in every ballot semifinalist right now. It's a good
Right,
example of what you're talking about, Kurt. Like
exactly, yeah. So it just feels that way more so than it did in the past. Jari's benefiting from that. I mean, like when he became a semifinalist in year one, I was like, oh, all right. I mean, the Saints fan in me loves that. But I know that there's some other people who are just as good and similar or close to it that haven't been here. Willie is in that queue. We know what the queue means. He's here. We knew he was going to be here. I mean, there's none of us who thought that he was going to fall off somehow. So now
I did think there was a chance. I did think there was a chance.
Did you? Okay.
I thought there was a chance, right? But I'm not surprised that he stayed in the 15. I just wonder again, though, like, is he one of those guys that they've talked about a couple of times and he doesn't advance? He sits in that 11 to 15 group, and like, could we be benefiting the next couple of years? Because Willie still technically has some time as a modern. Like, could we be using that time to talk about Richmond Webb, talk about a Tom Naylor?
I'm going to make a bold prediction right here. Willie Anderson's going to be elected to the Hall of Fame off of this ballot.
I think that's the
really think so. That it would be interesting because he's never made it past the 11 to 15 cut.
Yeah, but last year he didn't make it past because of Joe Thomas. They've elected a offensive lineman every year for the last 5 years after not electing one for years before that. There was Orlando Pace and like nobody. He's Orlando Pace over like a 6-year period. They've elected an offensive lineman every single year for the last 5 years. It's been a point of emphasis almost for them. I think that given the fact that this is Jari's first time on the ballot, and Jari is a guard, no offense to the guard position, but they always think tackles are way more important and centers don't exist. So given that, and given this ballot and the fact that he's the tenured offensive lineman, I'm not saying he's the person I would pick. I'm just saying with the way that room has gone, they're going to elect an offensive lineman. And if they're going to elect an offensive lineman, it's going to be Willie Anderson.
Yeah, and like I have my qualms with the Willie Anderson, but I won't deny like he deserves a spot in there. He was a premier tackle in the game during his era, right? Unverified BS sack stat excluded. Like he was legit like a top flight tackle during his career. And I think about that though. He last played what in 2007?
8.
So okay, thank you. So he still had almost almost a decade's worth of eligibility still left. And I keep coming back to the like, was he so much better than Richmond Webb, Steve Wisniewski, some of these other guys that they're not only not making the 15, they're not even making the semifinalist group of 25. And they're starting to stare down the danger zone of falling into the senior pool of this.
Webb was 1990 to 2002. He's he has
3 more years left after this one.
3 more years, 7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first team All Pro. Willie Anderson, 12 years, 4-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first team All Pro. So
wasn't Webb an all decade team member as well?
That is true. Webb is the all decade. And
it's fair to say that Willie probably didn't get some of the accolades that he should have, not because just he played with the Bengals. I wouldn't even say it's just that. It's also that he played right tackle. And the way that was has been viewed for decades, right? Is left tackle is more important than right tackle. It just is, right? Teams draft left tackles higher. They pay them more money. Like, that's not us making shit up. Like, that's reality. And
but how many left defensive ends do you face? The Bruce Smiths, the Reggie Whites that lined up on that side. Michael Strahan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree, right? I think it's a good example of how the media was kind of in tune to the NFL, and both were kind of ass wrong. Like, when I think about the modern game now, to me, there should be no real difference between left tackle and right tackle, especially with as much as the pass rushers move around. They didn't move around as much as Willie's time, but it started to happen, right? You would move guys around based off the situation. But I just keep coming back to this thing of Jari Evans. Like, why does he have to be so quick? And it's that question of, it's not that he's unworthy. It's that, why is he so much more worthy than other guys that have waited longer? And I think, Kirk, you hit on the thing. It's damn recency bias.
Well, I'm going to throw something else out, actually, that I was just thinking about now. I think we all agree that Darren Sharper sort of acted his way out of the Hall of Fame. And when you look at those really powerful Saints teams, this is the Sharper would have been the first one up. And Sharper was, oh my God, that season where New Orleans won the Super Bowl. I don't know that they win it without him. I truly believe that, especially on that defense. That was not a whole hell of a lot.
Right.
It was Sharper having to carry the workload of an awful lot. Now you've got a Saint from that. So, like, you talk about Peyton Manning being associated with Drew Brees. Sure as hell doesn't hurt either.
That's right.
And I wonder.
I mean, but Webb was there for Marino.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go to the 90s, if you go to the 90s all-decade team, right? Are the only players on offense who have not been elected from 90s all-decade team, Ben Coates, who I know Jack's huge on, right? I'm a Patriots fan, I'm huge on as well.
Yep.
So he's the only skill player. And then it's Richmond Webb, Steve Wisniewski, Mark Stepnoski. So, like, 3 offensive linemen, and none of those 3 guys have ever been on the ballot.
But then if it goes back to the recency bias thing, then maybe if they came up now, they might.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm throwing that out.
Like I said, they elected Orlando Pace, and then nobody, like, for a long time, they got back over that. The 2000s team, all of the offensive linemen except for Olin Kreutz are in already, right? So they've elected all of those guys. Now, again, I'm not saying that just because Mark Stepnoski and Steve Wisniewski and Webb made the all-decade team that they should automatically be Hall of Famers. I don't think there's any question Richmond Webb should be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion, but just regardless. But they're not even getting a chance to be heard in the room.
That's the problem. That's the problem right there. They're not even getting to
a place,
which is
insane.
Where they,
because we're going through the Hall of Fame Revisited project right now, and I'm looking at these all-decade teams from the 20s and 30s and 40s, and like Whizzer White, everyone keeps voting for, played for like 3 seasons. Like, he's definitely the best guy ever to be Supreme Court Justice of the United States, ever to play football. Not the best Supreme Court justice, because Alan Page was a better football player and has been on the Supreme Court in Minnesota for years.
And the best player to sort of be named after with a nickname that reminds me of taking a piss.
Yes, well, that too. He would have fit in with the Vikings of the 90s.
So I think, go ahead, Nevin. Sorry.
Yeah, but those teams are, I kind of feel like they're like, well, we got to name somebody. But like, you get into the 50s teams and the 60s teams, they really start getting serious. And these 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s teams, these are hard to freaking get on. And the fact that they're just haven't even had their story heard in the room is insane.
Yeah, and I think the way I think,
the nicest man in the world.
The way I think about that, Evan, like, I know like you and Kirk might have like more communication and like connection with Richmond Webb. So think about somebody who doesn't. I look at it like this. Not being all decades shouldn't automatically exclude you. Like, it feels like maybe it did for a long time with a Chuck Howley, let's say. Like, that's ridiculous. Shouldn't have taken him decades. However, the fact of you have enough guys that are peers that for that decade or most of that decade were at your same position. You were still felt as the best of the best at that position. That has to get you in the God blessed room at some point for a conversation. And my concern here is with a Richmond Webb. He's not only not getting in the conversation, he's not even getting to the round that could get him then to the conversation.
Correct.
To where you might come back and you say, hey, how much of Richmond Webb was elevated by the fact that Dan Marino was all-time great at avoiding sacks? It's a fair question, right? It's things you have to flush out in the process. But you can't even flush them out in the process because, again, we're talking about the offensive lineman. If voters are actually researching resumes and stuff, how would you leave him off of at least your semifinalist list? Yeah. So, to your point, 7-time Pro Bowl, 2-time first team All-Pro, right? All decade number?
Correct. Yep.
All decade. Yep.
There's no way, and you're not saying it's an insignificant position like a punter or something, right? Relatively speaking, for the Hall of Fame process. This is a left tackle that the NFL viewed as the more important, a premium position. The voters cannot be going back and researching these guys. Because if they were, Richmond Webb would at least be in the 25 and potentially in the 15. Steve Wisniewski, similar type of thing. Because there's not stats to go off of, which is, so it begs that question. It's why Tom Nalen's not there. It's why it makes me wonder, though, why Nick Mangold isn't there. And again, for those two, they play center. So the process over the decades is clearly not giving a crap about most of it.
Yeah, unless you play center for the Steelers, your odds are not very high getting in.
I think when Chris and I, because Chris did, we did a whole elevator up for the year, elevator down. I don't remember if I said this or not, but I have a feeling the next center that gets in is still playing right now, and Jason Kelce.
Yeah, you mentioned Kelce in your speech here, and what you brought up about him was the fact that he's actually been able to take his fame from his career and parlay that out into the media now, where other people that don't necessarily follow as closely as a group like us knows who the hell he is.
That's right.
They see him and in his podcast with his brother, or doing the Tide commercials, whatever. So yeah, he may end up being the next one that gets in there.
Whereas Tom Nalen,
some of these people.
Whereas if we remember Tom Nalen, like, keep me honest here, that Broncos offensive line during that top run refused to speak with the media. Like, that was an intentional choice. And I think, frankly, like a kind of dumb, self-defeating one that has hurt somebody like a Tom Nalen, right? Like, what was the point? What were you trying to prove? You've hurt the potential for an accolades. I don't think it's crazy at all to think that Jason Kelce is going to be that next center. Because if you say if he retires after this year, 6 years from now, I don't know that I see Nalen or Mangold being a finalist or being elected. I think it's totally reasonable.
I mean, the only other one coming up in between is Pouncey, right? So, I mean, in terms of all-pro, first-team all-pros in the history of football.
Steelers Pouncey?
Yeah, Steelers Pouncey.
So, okay, yeah. Well, then
we also have, what was it, Crutzen Saturday. They haven't gotten considered yet either.
Also true. But first-team all-pros in the history of football at center. Jim Otto has 10. DeMonte Dawson has 6. Mike Webster, Mick Tingelhoff, Jason Kelce have 5. Like, that's the list of all-pro centers in the history of the league. So he is currently tied for 3rd in all-pros in the history of football.
And you got to figure, by the time he's up there, I could see him being like a national analyst at that point.
Yes.
Doing color for either Fox
plus he's going to be Taylor Swift. Plus he's going to be Taylor Swift's brother-in-law. I'm gonna say that will not happen, but
he'll jump the queue though. I mean, he'll get ahead of guys like Saturday and Kreutz and Mangold.
It is interesting with all of those Peyton Manning teams. They get love for the wide receivers. There's love for the running back. There's love for the defense. No love for that offensive line whatsoever.
Yeah, no Tariq Glenn or Jeff Saturday love whatsoever, right? And it's always
same with the Patriots offensive line from all of those years, right?
Yep.
Logan Mankins is.
Yeah, Logan Mankins wasn't on any of the championship teams.
Yeah, he somehow missed all the championship teams. He was drafted after the 2004, and then we traded him to Tampa right before we won the Super Bowl. So
so Jack's message. So he's just trying to get put down one of the kids. So it'll be maybe a little bit. I don't know if we have anything more that we want to go here. I do think to Evan.
Let's put it this way. Let's get on a record for first impressions with these 15 people. Who do you think they're going to elect?
All right, do you want to go first with that?
Sure. So hold on, I gotta switch my spreadsheet over to the right thing because I've been looking at all pro teams off my spreadsheet. Sorry.
Yeah, I was actually buying time while I tried to get my thing.
And after we do this, I would like to talk about how many of the actual 15 would we replace? Because that might be an interesting conversation.
For sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So who I think are going to get in, this is not necessarily who I would put in again. Who I think is going to get in, I will say it's going to be the easiest one for me is Julius Peppers is going to get in. After that, I will say I think they'll do Holt over Johnson. I'll go Willie Anderson, as I said. Again, not who I necessarily put in, but I think he's getting there. I think Patrick Willis gets in. And Now it comes down to Andre Johnson or Devin Hester for me. I'm going to say that it ends up being, I'll say Andre Johnson over Hester, even though that's not the way I would go. So I'll say Holt, Johnson, Anderson, Willis, and Peppers.
I'll go. Mine is almost identical to yours, Evan, with the difference of I think we'll put Gates in over Johnson.
Gates over Johnson. Do you think they're going to take Willie Anderson?
Yeah, I do. I mean, like I to your point, they've always sort of like been very big on offensive linemen. He's here. I think he's the one person that will be, like we always call, like a bit of a wild card, but he's here. There, he's got the momentum. Yeah, I do.
All right. Who you got, Chris?
So I'm with you there on the Gates and Peppers. I think they're both first ballots. I got Andre Johnson, Jared Allen, simply because he was in that 6 to 10 range. And then I'm going to go with Torrey Holt again. I think they've made such a fuss about the logjam at wide receiver. I think they really do take and try to get 2 in this year. Kind of looking at this year as a cleanup year.
And I think I am in the exact same boat as Chris here. I think it's Peppers, Gates, Andre, Holt, Jared Allen. I think. Go ahead.
I was to say this is Holt's 5th time on the ballot, and this is Jared Allen's 5th time on the ballot. So that makes sense if they're doing a cleanup.
Yeah, and the way I think about this is Andre has been in the 6 to 10 range both times he's been on the ballot. So like they clearly have valued him. I think this was maybe Holt's 1st or 2nd time in the 6 to 10. Like typically he didn't make the cut from the 11 to 15.
Right.
We could go bonkers here, and I say put all 3 of the wide receivers in now, but I think there is a chance, to Chris's point, that they will be a little more intentional about clearing the logjam of wide receiver that a lot of them have been complaining about. Where I think my question comes in is it 1 or is it 2? Right? It's like there's going to be 1, and if there isn't,
there has to be one. The rest of the first ballots and people left over aren't strong enough, I think, for that room to not take 1. Like the 6 new people we have on the ballot, like you said, Peppers probably getting in, Gates is 50-50. And the other 4 guys, I don't think are getting in. So that just leaves you, 3 spots for 7 guys.
Who were the 6 through 10 last time?
I think wide receivers,
and who else was it?
And then Jared Allen, and then Albert Lewis.
Thank you. That's right. And Albert Lewis is out, so there's like an
graduated
open 10 spot, open 6 to 10 spot. Plus, you're adding, you would assume, Peppers and Gates in there.
So you look at it, you're getting 3 of the 6 to 10 from last year,
plus 2 first ballots
and 2 first ballots.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at with you. That's where I'm at with you, Chris. Is like I think the voters do somewhat still respect their queue in the modern process. Senior process, we know that's kind of become this weird free for all. But I think it's those 5. I don't know. Like Willie Anderson's been in the room a couple times. He hasn't moved up. It would feel odd to see him make a big move up with a 2nd offensive lineman on the ballot. I might have said Darren Woodson could have had a chance this year, but just what I was talking about a little bit ago, right? With like if I'm in the room advocating for Rodney Harrison, I don't mean this to be a shit, but like I'm sabotaging Darren Woodson with some of the numbers. Yeah. And that could do just enough to damage to split the vote. And neither one of them might make it to the 6 to 10, let alone the 1 to 5.
Yeah. Yep.
I think Jerry Evans could actually be a surprise that does make it in that 6 to 10 range ahead of some of these other guys because of how quickly he's moved so far. Which, if you look back at history, that's for the guard position. That's kind of odd. You think of guys like Will Shields, who was probably a more decorated player, and how long it took him to move up. So,
and he didn't play with Drew Brees.
According to Pro Football Reference's thing, he's the top guard, not in the hall. So again, what does that mean? Who knows? But again, if people are like, who should I vote for? Let's go to Pro Football Reference and rank everybody. It sometimes makes it a little bit easier. That's a real big thing for Willie. Willie, by the way, Willie is significantly further down than a lot of other people on that.
And I think, Evan, like, it's not crazy to say that those people have laptops when they're in the room. Those people use this shit. So it is totally reasonable to think they might leverage a stat point and be like, hey, according to this Pro Football Reference monitor score, like, here's how the two players rank relative to their positions, which is significant for offensive linemen because they don't have those tangible stats.
Correct. Yeah.
And, you know, you could say for Willie Anderson, he had some of the like PFF data, but he doesn't have his whole career. I think Jari Evans has more of it, right? But how much does that group of 50 really care about PFF? Like NBC certainly does, right? And PFF's done brilliantly in terms of marketing themselves. But like with the voters, how much do the PFF rankings really matter?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I sometimes it's like, right?
Although to be fair, I don't think Ron Borges owns a computer, so it doesn't work.
That could be, right? So I think my question then is, out of these 15, like, how many shouldn't have been here this time? Not even as a slight against them as a player, but just combination of like process stuff, slash, I think there were better players on the ballot that should have been considered instead. Like, how many guys were there?
For me, Fred Taylor's the one that jumps out.
Yeah, Fred Taylor's the automatic one that jumps out.
At what point can we ever say that Fred Taylor was? Look, I don't even think he's in the top 5 of eligible running backs personally. Right. When he played, maybe 1 year you could say he was in the top 5 of actual running backs. Now, was he in that 6 to 10? Yeah, quite a bit.
Fred Taylor came
rewarding though.
Here's the trivia question for you: what was the last uniform Fred Taylor wore during his career?
I don't even know.
Patriots, right?
New England Patriots.
Okay.
He and Torrey Holt actually both technically finished their career with the New England Patriots. But neither made it out of preseason. Torrey Holt just realized that his legs were done. Fred Taylor was asked to do a blocking drill against defensive linemen. He's like, I don't feel like blocking. I'm done. He left right after the blocking drill. Like, that's my mental image of Fred Taylor as a player. I hate saying it because he was much better than that. But Fred Taylor doesn't belong here. I think there are other people. Jari Evans is here, but are there other offensive linemen I'd rather have than Willie Anderson and Jari Evans? Yes.
Yeah, I'd rather have the conversation around Wisniewski and Webb.
Exactly. Wisniewski and Webb 100% for those. If we're only going to have 2, those are my 2.
I think we all sort of agree with that. Also, too, it looks like we're all sort of consensus, some stronger than others, about Freeney at this stage.
Like if you were comparing Leslie O'Neal to Dwight Freeney, like especially when you think of circumstance, not to mention some of the numbers, like give me a break. Like Leslie O'Neal should have been here, not Dwight Freeney. Certainly, I think we've established Tim McDonald should have been here, right? And like should he have been here and clear? It should have been like clear cut. He's the safety in like Woodson Harrison weight. Or if you say, do I drop one of the safeties off? I probably drop Harrison because of he played more recently, so he's got more time than Darren Woodson, because Darren retired after 2003, so his clock's starting to tick a little bit too, right? Like he's in that last 5 years. Yeah, so he's in year 16. But McDonald should have been here, no question about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, McDonald and Kevin Williams weren't even semifinalists, so I mean, like, just taking the people off the semifinalist list. If I'm looking at this, like, if you want to take Harrison off, or you want to take Reggie Wayne or one of the wide receivers off, and put, I don't know,
Smith.
Yeah, so we put Steve Smith, or like there are no defensive there are defensive ends. Will Fork's the only defensive lineman. As a Patriots fan, I'd have no trouble with having Will Fork over Harrison, or a defensive line or a third wide receiver. Like, not again, Kevin Williams, Patriots fan. Kevin Williams is a better player than Vince Wilfork, but Kevin Williams is not available.
Yeah, but they're not on TV every week.
And yeah, I guess so. But like, Kevin Williams doesn't even have any social media. He has Twitter, no Facebook, no nothing.
What a happy life he must live.
He must be giddy. But like,
But I think to your point, like some of the names that I'm bringing up weren't even semi-finalists.
yeah.
And I think
again, I joke every single year, Kirk, when we see the nominees list, who's going to be there? Jake Delhomme. Jake Delhomme is going to be there.
Oh, yeah.
And Drew
Oh, the prelim list. Yeah.
And Drew Bledsoe will not. Every
But this-
single year I make that joke, and every single year that's the case. Not
It's
that Drew
also the
Bledsoe's
same
Hall of
group,
Famer.
though. I mean, like we've talked about Tom Nolan, and for those who want to learn more about him, follow Thomas Hall on Twitter. He made a convert out of a lot of us. But there was a year that Nolan wasn't even a prelim. I think, was it Reuben Brown or Lomas Brown? One year they weren't even on the prelim list.
Yeah, and then like, so I think what we're highlighting here is like I would put Steve Smith over Reggie Wayne every day of the week. I would take Vince Wilfork over Rodney Harrison if you're thinking of let's have a Patriots player from the dynasty.
I have no
Let's
problem
have
with
the right one, right? Most of those other semifinalists, like I'm trying to remember who were the 10 that didn't make the cut.
It's Eddie George.
No. Ricky Waters, yes, obviously. We've already
So Ricky Waters, I'll go in alphabetical order here. So
Thank you.
it's Tiki Barber, Anquan Bolden, London Fletcher, Eddie George, James Harrison, who has an interesting argument to me, but let's get Willis out of the way first.
Mhm.
Where am I? Robert Mathis.
Mhm.
Heinz Ward, Ricky Waters, Vince Wilfork, and Steve Smith. I miss Steve Smith Senior. Steve Smith Senior, excuse me. So not to be confused with Steve Smith Jr.
Like I would take if I said Ricky Waters over Fred Taylor.
Yes.
Now I'll pound the table for that. Steve Smith over Reggie Wayne would also pound the table for that. Wilfork replaces Harrison. Like what I still think is striking though is how many names we're calling out here: the McDonald's, the O'Neills, the Kevin Williams. We didn't even bring up guys like Eugene Robinson, Cornelius Bennett.
Cornelius Bennett. Yeah.
There is a bunch of guys right in late eligibility that I look at that aren't even in that semifinal group of 25 that I think are better than a number of the final 15. That doesn't even bring up the Richmond Webbs, the Wisniewskis, some of these other guys we have talked.
Well, it's crazy to me. Again, we talk about, I'm a Patriots fan. It's going to drive me nuts when there are more Colts guys in the hall during this decade than there are Patriots guys. But growing up as a Patriots fan, that Bills team kicked our ass over and over and over and over again. Bruce Smith was scary, but Daryl Talley and
Biscuit.
Biscuit.
Cornelius Bennett.
Sorry, just right on my head. Daryl Talley and Cornelius Bennett were just as important. And for that team to go to 4 straight Super Bowls and have 3 guys on offense and 1 defensive player is nuts to me.
Fred Smirlis on that team too?
What?
Was Fred Smirlis on that team or is he pre?
Oh, he was on that. Yeah,
Smirlis was around then. So probably.
Yeah.
But I think as I think about Cornelius Bennett, right, there's some off the field stuff there, certainly. Can't ignore that, but it's not supposed to matter until it does. Hence why Darren Sharper is never a prelim candidate, even though he has
and there's a reason.
Wasn't Sharper a prelim though? A couple times.
No, he wouldn't. I don't think he's been a prelim recently. I don't think.
Yeah.
Jim Trier. So
yeah, Jim Trier is on.
Well, maybe he has a Terrell Owens new Hall of Fame that he's put together.
So what I'm trying to say here is like with the Cornelius Bennett, he was a starter on 5 Super Bowl teams because you got to count the 98 Falcons.
The 98 Falcons, yeah.
I was talking about how he was a two-time. Oh God, what was it? NEA Defensive Player of the Year.
5 Super Bowls has gotta suck.
Yeah, but if you think about it, he won a Defensive Player of the Year award twice. I think it was the NEA one. I could be mistaken, but he won it twice. And every single defensive player that had won that award twice when it was offered was a first ballot Hall of Famer, except Charles Haley, who is also in the Hall of Fame. Like, and this is on a list. Yeah. And this was he's in the group with like Jack Lambert and Mike Singletary, and the only guys in Charles Haley, the only guys above them are like Reggie White and Bruce Smith. And to me, that starts to put Biscuit's like career in the proper perspective. To your point, Evan, like when did the Bills defense start to become scary in the late 80s? It was when Cornelius Bennett came from the Colts, right? Like
Yeah.
when he got there, that defense changed dramatically almost
Yeah.
overnight. And
Yeah.
he was every bit as valuable.
It's honestly like what's happened to the Bears defense with Montez Sweat. Like the difference between pre-Montez Sweat defense and post-Montez Sweat defense for this Bears team that I'm forced to watch because I live out here is ridiculous.
Some of it helps the crappy competition they play, right?
Oh, but great, I understand. But right now, Montez Sweat is the leading sacker on two separate teams in the NFL, which has never happened in the history of the league. So,
but as I think about Cornelius Bennett, back to that, he was a starter on 5 Super Bowl teams. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler. I think he was 2-time AP1.
Yeah.
He didn't eclipse 100 plus sacks, but part of that was because he wasn't just a pass rusher, right? Like he was great against the run. He was really good in coverage. Like he could do it all. And I think he's an example of a guy fell out of the media spotlight. He's been on the prelim list, so clearly like any off the field stuff isn't impacting him there. But there's something missing, like that formal conversation that when you start talking about him more, his case starts to sound more interesting. It doesn't mean that he would get in and be one of the final 5 this year, next year, but he's the type of guy that feels like, again, his resume deserves a conversation and it just doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And it's
all three of those second team linebackers from the 90s all-decade team, Hardy Nickerson, Cornelius Bennett, Levon Kirkland. Nothing. Brand new.
Well, there's a name.
But we got London Fletcher that's on a semifinalist the last 2 years.
Yeah. What's that?
We got London Fletcher on the semifinalist list the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe Jack, hey Jack, who had done the research for London Fletcher. Like even his 4 Pro Bowls were all like alternate or replacements. Like Cornelius Bennett was being legit voted for these things multiple times by his peers when the peers were still voting for it, right? Like he was getting this shit legit, no replacement, no backup stuff. Like it's just maddening. Like Jack, we were talking about, we gave our predictions for what we think the class of 5 will be, and we're talking about who would we kick out and who would we put in to the round of 15.
And then that took us from who should have been a semifinalist, it wasn't. So that's which is how we've gotten to where we are now.
A lot.
We talked a lot about Richmond Webb, just to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't honestly know. I mean, I think that Peppery is going to be in. I think you'll see 1 wide receiver. I think.
Yeah, who's your 5, Jack?
Yeah, who's your 5? Just pick your 5 out of this group. Not who you pick, but who you think they're going to elect.
Who I think they're going to elect. Well, I'm kind of a cynic, so I'll say Peppers, Gates, Jared Allen, Andre Johnson, Patrick Willis.
Okay.
Yeah. That grouping doesn't surprise me either. My argument, by the way, Jack, when you weren't here, as to why I think Willie Anderson's getting elected is just because they went years where there's Orlando Pace and nobody else. And they've made a point of electing an offensive lineman every year for the last 5. I just think that he's next on the queue. Like you said, though, as Chris pointed out, he'd be jumping from 11 to 15 all the way up. So your guys are probably better. That's just my reasoning for why I think that it's going to be Willie getting in.
Well, we've hit the 2 hour mark, so maybe we should just wrap that up. But I do want to sort of close with, and actually, Evan, I want to give that to you because I think we should acknowledge that another Hall of Fame did do a class recently. Yeah. So I think we should sort of touch on that really quick.
The Boston Red Sox had their Hall of Fame class. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for this.
Sorry.
Now you sound like a pro football.
My bad. I thought
there are 4 people who are going to be elected into the Hall of Fame. There's a front office executive named Elaine Stewart, who nobody's going to know, but she's the non-uniform inductee. But the other 3 are going to be Trot Nixon, Jonathan Papelbon, and Dustin Pedroia. Are all getting elected, who are 3 very hard people to argue with getting elected. One of my favorite Red Sox memories still of all time, I was at the what years? 2000 and it must have been 2004 ALDS, where we were playing the We were playing the Oakland A's and Trotniks. I was in Fenway, and you guys haven't been to Fenway. There's a lot of obstructed view seats, and so we're up in like the back of down the first base line, and Trotnik ends up to play, and he hits the ball really loud and really high, and the entire crowd erupts. But we have no idea what's happening until like we saw it land over the fence in center field. So the whole I saw him hit it, I saw it land, I saw nothing in between because there was nothing but green ceiling in the way. But that Trot Nixon is one of my favorite memories with my buddies ever being at a sporting event. So, and of course the laser show in Papelbon. Those are all three very easy. But congratulations to all three. And Elaine Stewart, who congratulations getting a non-uniformed. I don't know what you did, but congratulations.
Yeah, those three players feel like Red Sox Hall of Famers, right? Like they'll always have a special place in everybody's heart. Is there anybody that you thought that isn't into the Red Sox Hall of Fame that should be?
There aren't a ton of them. Like the Red Sox Hall of Fame, it's not really that hard to get in. I mean, we'd have to get down to like a Scott Cooper type player in order to get there. Like, I mean, anyone you can think of from any team that's been successful is pretty much in. Like Ellis Burks, Mike Greenwell.
Okay, you're establishing
John Valentin. Mike Greenwell, the 1989 AL MVP, since Kid Seiko got disqualified.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Evan. It's only a 3-year requirement of service, right?
Yeah, it's 3 years to get 3 years with the team, but that doesn't mean like everybody's in.
No, I know, but I'm just
I think
in fairness to Jack and I, should we be talking about the Bulls creating a Ring of Honor?
I was just gonna.
We did that a couple weeks ago.
We talked about that, but we would love your take, please.
Yeah, Jack, and maybe you're a little more plugged in on some of the details. Like, is the first pass of the Ring of Honor just going to be the people that already have like their names and jerseys in the rafters, or are they adding anybody else?
Yeah. So here's who the list is, and it bummed me out a little bit because of one guy who's not here who absolutely should be here. But here is the list, and I'm just looking at the I'm just looking at the collage that they released. So I'm not reading this in alphabetical order. I'm just reading it based on the order in the collage. Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson.
That's an old family joke. My grandparents in Miami in the 90s ran into Phil Jackson, and my grandmother unfortunately called him Michael Jackson and then Phil Jordan, which was unfortunate, but especially because she was a great sports fan, so I don't know why she did that. But anyway, Scotty, Dennis, and Michael, Phil Jackson, Dick Klein, who I'll talk about in a moment, Bob Love, Tex Winter, Artis Gilmore, Tony Kukoc, Red Kerr, Jerry Krause, Jerry Sloan, Chet Walker, and the 1995-1996 Chicago Bulls.
No Norm Van Leer.
There it is. That's the name that's missing, and he is not in the rafters. He should have been. Jerry Sloan was our first retired number. Norm Van Leer should have been our second. His number is still not retired, and so now to see him here with more years to this team than Chet Walker, and Chet Walker did great things for the Bulls, but just to see Norm
Van Leer was also for decades like a major presence in Chicago media. Like, for those that don't know, we would know Jack, right? In terms of the Bulls games, and like you thought about Norm Van Leer, and you did say Johnny Red Kerr?
So I said Red Kerr. So so
you better be.
Red Kerr, So for people who don't know, Red Kerr was the first Bulls coach in the expansion season 1966-1967, led them to the playoffs, and then became much later our color man on TV. Yeah, and just a beloved character on the in the dynasty, and then was an announcer for a long time after that. And Norm Van Leer was a studio guy. They died on the same day in 2009 during Derrick Rose's rookie year. But Norm Van Leer played in the backcourt with Jerry Sloan, where Jerry Sloan and Norm Van Leer were each individually among the very best defensive guards in the NBA. So as a tandem, they were locked down, shut you down. I mean, they were everything. and Jerry Sloan, rightfully first retired number. He's the original Bull. So that was fine. I had no problem. I mean, I wasn't alive yet, but I mean, like retroactively, I have no problem with Jerry Sloan being the first retired number. That's definitely worthwhile. I mean, they led the team that basically kept the Bulls in Chicago, the Dick Motta led team that started making noise in the Western Conference in the early 1970s, and then was in the Western Conference Finals in 1975 against the eventual NBA champion Golden State Warriors. So that was the team that really kept the Bulls in Chicago, because Chicago had previous NBA teams. We had the Chicago Packers, who became the Zephyrs and then became the Baltimore Bullets and are now the Washington Wizards. And so Chicago, wasn't necessarily going to be an NBA home, at least not as early as they were. And that you can count that to Jerry Sloan, Norm Van Leer, Bob Love certainly, and Chet Walker. But yeah, I mean, Norm should be there. It's really a shame that he's
not the only one I look at.
And Dennis, they said that you had to be there 3 years. Dennis was there 3 years. You're honoring the 96 team. You could have honored Horace Grant instead of Dennis for that first year.
I'm honoring John Paxson first.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, Dennis Rodman with only 3 years, they were obviously as great a 3 years as you could have gotten, but you're already honoring him as part of the 96 team. You come back for round 2. The one guy I want to mention who a lot of people won't know is Dick Klein. He founded the Bulls. He came up with our colors. He came up with our name. He came up with our logo. He should have a banner as well. I mean, I'm not like banner kind of a guy, but I mean, Dick Klein founded the Bulls, launched the team. So I would love to see that. So that was really nice. It's really fitting that he's got that Ring of Honor spot. But yeah.
So the best thing of all is the one name you didn't mention, because that bastard never will deserve it in my eyes, no matter what.
Uh-oh, you're going to name someone I really like, and now I'm going to be like complicit. All right, go ahead.
Jerry Reinsdorf.
Oh, well, I assume that Jerry's not going to Ring of Honor himself in round 1.
He can stay out of the Ring of Honor his whole life.
Jerry also doesn't have a banner either.
And
so I'm not surprised.
Norton, he killed it. He killed the dynasty. He's tolerated decades of mediocrity, so he can go to hell.
I just thought it was interesting that you have a team where Dennis Rodman and don't put Jack Haley in to protect him. So,
but I do think it's interesting. There are some names there, like Paxson, Horace Grant. We talked about Norm Van Leer. Like Grant and Paxson were pretty important cogs on those first 3 championship teams, right? And the reason I went with Paxson, Jack, is 2 things. Obviously, the big shots and the big moments in the playoffs. But I also think of Paxson was the second cog in the wheel when they built around Jordan, who was the first, got the next longest tenured Bull. It was Paxson. One Pippen and one Grant.
Paxson was number 2. That is true. Yeah.
That's
definitely.
And so I just think about that of like, I wonder if Paxson's time in the front office like kept him out of here. I know he doesn't have his jersey retired or anything, right? But maybe him and Grant and some of these other guys will be featured.
And Cartwright and BJ, I assume, and Harper and Luke. I assume they'll get
Derrick Rose will be probably soon.
Yeah, Derrick and Joe, and I assume they'll get to all those guys, Lou All. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I'm glad they're doing it. Norm Van Leer should have been there.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Well, I guess at that note, we're bringing this show to a close. Check out all the other shows here in the Buchnerverse, my channel, so I can call it the Buchnerverse. So I do. As always, there's the weekly Hall of Fame show with Evan Nolan. So we'll be doing that again next week. There's How the Hell Was This a Hit? The last one we just did was Tiny Tim, tiptoe
through the wind.
Yeah, tiptoe through the tulips. Nice English, Kirk. There's a few more interviews that are going to be coming up soon. Look for those soon. And yeah, also it's the show I do with Vinny Lospinuso, where Vinny makes the Hall of Fame case for some very interesting people. And yeah, well, say Sometimes he'll say, we're doing this. It's like, who?
This guy invented the jockey strap. How many kids were saved through the generations because
Not give him an idea. Because then I'm going to have to do a 15-minute thing about jocks, and I don't really want to do that. Because I never have the heart to say, no, I don't want to do this person.
This is all said with love.
It absolutely is. But hey, some of the ones that he's done, relatives and descendants of those individuals have reached out to him. And that's cool. I think happened about 4 times. So which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
This was a fun conversation today.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you. Hey, Chris, you talk too much as always. But
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Are we staying out past the recording?
There we go. So with that, wherever you are, wherever you may be, make it a great day because it's not coming again. Later.
Take care, guys.